Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring ignorant futures. The Valley of the Masters by Charles Minor Blackford. The Birds and the Bees by David E. Fisher. World Without War by E. G. van Wald. A Pride of Islands by C. C. MacApp. Manners of the Age by H. B. Fyfe. The Valley of the Masters by Charles Minor Blackford. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, September 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. 1. Henry stopped and squatted in the underbrush, well hidden from the path, but close enough to see the coming group. Within a minute they became visible. There were 25 to 30 boys, girls, and youths walking slowly in ragged groups, talking and laughing. The youngest were ahead, a group just entering their teens, dressed like the rest in jackets and shorts, with sandals of plast on their feet. The dark synthetic cloth made them a uniformed body. Henry's nose wrinkled in distaste. Again his hideaway would be invaded, and he would have to move on. But where to? They were opposite him now, a bare 20 feet away. Most of them looked as alike as brothers and sisters. Logically enough, there was not one who wasn't a cousin in some degree to the others. Plump, round-faced, and dull-eyed, they lived from cradle to grave according to custom. It was the custom, when they were old enough to feel the urge, to join a group like this. Together they tramped the valley from spring to fall, gathering fruit and nuts as they came in season. When a couple felt like settling down, they awaited a vacant mastership, a plot of orchard and the house that went with it, and moved in. And they took over the responsibilities of the place and bred or adopted the 3 children necessary to hold it. They remained there until they became elders. Then they moved into town, where they worked in the factories, idled, and gossiped until death overtook them. They were ignorant, superstitious, living out their dull routine as generations before them had. Only a few questioned it. Almost none made any active challenge. The youngsters sighted the tavern and made for it at a dead run, wanting to claim favourable bunks before the others arrived. Henry was impatient. Ants were crawling over his foot, but it would never do for him to be seen, especially in the woods. One didn't go into them. They were inhabited by goblins, ghosts, and fearsome animals. Finally they were past. He straightened, started to step into the path, then squatted again quickly. Coming alone behind the others was the girl. Her slimness and pale hair made her stand out from the rest. His thoughts had been upon her since that day when his group passed the house of her father, an avocado master, down in the lower valley. She had called to them to wait, had run inside to come back with the 2 pouches, one for her personal belongings, the other for food. Living on a fruit diet as they did, they ate most of their awakened hours. "I'm Theta," she called out happily as she joined them. "Mamma says I'm old enough to go with you." She recognized a cousin and ran over to join her, her hair a spot of brightness among the dark. He wanted her from that moment, but she was far too young. He would have to wait. Coming towards Theta from the opposite direction was the slap of flat feet. In a moment Henry recognized Ola. He was considerably older than the others. His only object in life was enjoying all the young girls who joined the group. He was a bulky dullard and a bully, his eyes small and mean. It was evident that he was looking for the girl. A pleased expression spread over his face when he saw her. She stopped abruptly, looking about for a way to flee, but the path was enclosed by woods, and Ola was on her. "Leave me alone!" she cried in anger as his hand closed about her wrist. Henry could see disgust for him in her eyes. Why didn't she let him have what he wanted and be done with him? That was the way most of the girls responded. "Won't have anything to do with me, eh?" gloated Ola. "Think you are too good for us? I've been watching you, asking about you. None of the boys have had you, but you won't get by me." Henry felt a surge of sympathy for her, fed by his dislike for the other. He slipped into the path. He was almost up to them before he was seen. Ola swung about, still holding the girl. Henry stopped 6 feet off. "Why don't you let her alone if she doesn't want you?" he asked her with deceiving mildness, apparently relaxed. There was startled fright in Ola's eyes. Henry had appeared so suddenly, from nowhere. Worse, he was proscribed. He was accused of learning witchery. Henry was taller than Ola, but thin and almost weak-looking. This would be something to boast about, capturing the witch single-handed, bringing him in for punishment. "Make me let her alone, then," he challenged. It was usual to boast and strut before fighting. Henry took the advantage of immediate attack. He sprang at the other, catching him before he unhanded the girl with a right to the jaw, a left to the belly. Theta ran about 50 feet down the path, then turned to watch. Ola, head down, was closing in to grip his opponent, but Henry stepped to one side, coming up with a blow to Ola's right eye. Ola raised his guard, and Henry sank both fists into the other's stomach. Ola doubled up. There was no fight in him. He plunged past Henry, down the path towards the tavern. Henry faced the girl. She came towards him without hesitation. "Thank you," she said. "I shouldn't have left the others. I didn't think he had noticed." She walked slowly towards the tavern, Henry beside her. The past year had made her taller, filled her out. Yet the sweetness of her expression was the same, and the vitality in her face and eyes. "He's been after you, then?" She nodded. "Him and a couple of others." It was just a turn in the path to sight of the tavern. Henry halted. "You seem to forget I'm proscribed," he reminded her. "I don't care. I like you. Always have." Her voice became tragic. "Why did you go into that awful learning house?" "I got tired of wondering what kept the food in the bins fresh, how it got from the hoppers in the field to the bins, what made the light and heat, where the water came from." "But the old ones did it all by magic." "What kind of magic?" His face had a slightly mocking expression. "If that was so, why are things beginning to break down? Magic should go on forever." From the direction of the tavern came sounds of shouting. He smiled at her. "You'd better go on before they think I've turned you into a bat." "Henry," she began, but she had lingered too long. The whole group rounded the turn, trotting, their face twisted in superstitious fury. They raised their arms when they sighted the two. Each hand had a stone in it. "She's one of them too!" screamed fat, malicious Heckler, seeing a chance to vent her envy. "They're planning something! Throw! Throw!" Her voice was a hysterical shriek. Henry saw the stones in the air. Grasping the girl's wrist, he drew her into the brush beside the path. He stopped his flight under an ancient tree and let go her wrist. "See," he said, "even to speak to me is dangerous." She tossed her head and brushed the hair from her brow, her eyes scornful. "I don't care. I'm sick of them." "You can go back. Give them some fancy tale about my hexing you, but say that you crossed 2 sticks or something and got away." She looked him squarely in the face, her own composed and determined. "I'd rather stay with you." He dropped to a jutting rock and scraped at the dead leaves with the heel of his sandal. "It's not nice," he began, "the life I live. hiding in the woods by day, sneaking into deserted houses or taverns at night for food and warmth. I've been doing it all summer now, and that's bad enough. In a month, the masters of these upper levels will be closing the houses and the taverns, moving to town for the winter. Everything on the lower levels will be taken up. They expect me to be starved into surrender. Theta dropped to her knees beside him. I'd rather be with you. I've wanted to be with you ever since I first saw you, but you never seemed to notice me. I noticed you. He placed a hand over hers. But you were so young-looking, so sweet. I was waiting for you to grow up a little more. Then, when I found an open mastership, I was going to ask you to share it with me. Theta felt a tingling happiness. Her face flushed, her eyes brightened. Henry, she cried, I've always wanted you. That's why I never... He put an arm about her and pulled her close. They sat that way for minutes. I'll give you a mastership, he cried out. I'll give you the whole valley. He pushed her shoulders around until she was facing him. What is your first wish, mistress of the valley? Something to eat, she said promptly. Henry made a rueful face. My dear, that is something you will have to become used to, being hungry. Fortunately, I know of a ruined and deserted house where the bins are still operating. The forest they were in filled a steep-sided ravine. He followed it for some distance, then started abruptly up the left-hand slope to a low-crowned crest planted with apple trees. 100 yards away was the house. One corner of it was crushed by a fallen tree. The low sun made shafts of light through the trees as Henry approached it cautiously, Theta behind him. He entered through the broken wall into what was once a bedroom, then through a door into the remainder of the house. It was a typical living room they entered, with a regular ration of furnishings. The visiphone and visiscreen were set into the inner wall. A calendar clock was over the front door, its dial marked with symbols for planting, pruning, cutting, and picking. The hand was approaching the latter symbol. Henry went through into the kitchen, leaving her to watch through the window. He returned with a basket of mixed fruit. She reached for an avocado, plucking her knife from its sheath with the other hand. "Hey, wait a minute," Henry cried. "You are a sinner now, remember?" He pushed the basket towards her. "Fill your pouch first. Eat later." They ate, keeping an eye on the path towards the house until dark. No one moved at night, except on extreme emergency, and then only with lanterns and noise. Without lights on, other than the normal glow of the walls, they retired to one of the undamaged bedrooms. "See?" she said with a rippling, contented laugh. "I waited for you." 2. It was still dark when they filled their pouches to capacity and slipped from the house. "What will we do now?" Theta asked. Henry looked down. "I don't know. I had something planned, but—" "What was it?" "I was going to climb up the mountain, past the top defrost towers and the force fence, to the top of the ridge." She stared at him, her eyes round. "Why, that's the edge of the world! You might fall off." "Not if I'm careful." Only a few in the valley could boast of going beyond the top row of defrosters, fewer yet of even going within looking distance of the force fence. Beyond it, tradition said, lived great beasts that could eat a man with one bite, while the ridges that bounded the valley on 3 sides, to the east, west, and north, were edges of the world from which one dropped off into bottomless space. To the south, where forest enclosed the mouth of the valley, tradition was vague, but the edge must be off there somewhere. It had taken Henry all summer to build up his determination, but now up was the only direction it was safe to go. "If you're not afraid, I'm not either," Theta said. "Let's go." Carrying the basket with its remaining supply of the fruit between them, they started up the slope. It was only a short distance to the top defrosters. These only went into action at blossom time for the apples and other highland fruits. From there to the force fence was a steep climb through rocks and brush. Their pace grew slower as they approached the fence. Their eyes scanned the rocks and scant brush for signs of the great beasts, but they saw none. Higher yet, about a quarter of a mile, was the top of the ridge, the edge of the earth. Theta pressed against him. "I'm scared," she murmured. Henry's face became set. "We said we were going," he said curtly. "You can stay if you wish." He selected rocks for both hands. The force fence only gave them a strong tingling sensation. The plast sandals insulated them somewhat. The slope became steeper, but there was no indication of any great beasts. Too excited to stop and rest, although they were breathing heavily, they pressed onward. Would it be night down there, over the edge of the world? Stars shining? Would it be daylight and clouds? The top of the ridge was 100 feet away. 10. Henry flung himself on the ground, so if he became dizzy he would not lose his balance and fall. Theta did the same. Side by side, they crept the remaining distance. What they saw made them stare in open-mouthed amazement. Before them was another ridge running out from the northern range. It was pretty much like the one they were on. Between it and them was another valley. Defrost towers rose from among the trees. Over the top of the opposite ridge they could see still another. The northern mountains were lost in the blue distance. The shock to both was unnerving. Steeled to look out into limbo, they found a valley much like their own. Together they turned and looked back into what could be seen of their own valley. Even in shape, the two were roughly similar. They could see the tall, slim defrost towers, an occasional house, and the geometrical designs of the groves and orchards with their orderly rows of trees. There was town at the lower end of the valley, and there, at the upper end, was something they never knew existed. A large, ivy-clad building that stretched from cliffside to cliffside, and yet above that was a still blue lake. Henry looked ahead again. There was a difference in the other valley. There were no orderly rows of fruit trees, only thick forest like that which grew only in their ravines or beyond the foot of the valley. The defrost towers looked down on multicolored autumn foliage, even in the bottom of the valley where everything should be green. Why weren't there fruit trees for the defrosters to protect? What kind of a crop did this valley grow? Henry scrambled to his feet. Theta looked up at him. "What?" "I'm going down there." "What for?" "To see what they grow, what kind of people they are." "They might—" He smiled down at her. "I've become an expert at not being seen," he assured her. "I've had them pass 5 feet away." Theta got up. "I'm coming too." They reached the force fence, but there was no irritation. The forest started immediately, and it was fairly clear of underbrush. There were no paths to be seen, no sounds of harvesters, no unfamiliar trees. Even on the floor of the valley there were no signs of life, although they had seen and avoided several houses. Henry stopped suddenly, staring ahead. "What's the matter?" Theta asked. Wordlessly, Henry pointed to the bole of a dead and rotting tree. Its straight trunk had branches coming out of it in orderly rings, its top cut off to make the branches spread at ladder distance above the ground. It leaned drunkenly against a supporting tree. "Avocado," he said. "This was once a grove." The normal fear of the unfamiliar swept over Theta. "I want to get out of here. It scares me," she quavered. Henry glanced up at the sun. "Too late to cross over now," he said. "We'll find a house." He turned and looked about. There should be one close, on the slope of the ridge, so as not to take up usable land. He sighted one and made for it. From the outside it looked no different from those in their own valley. Beside it was an old apple tree with some emaciated fruit on it. At least they wouldn't starve. As the house was obviously empty, he went around to the back, got a picking ladder off the rack, and plucked enough fruit to fill their pouches, although it was unflavorable. Not until then did they venture to the front door and push it open. As far as they could see, it was like the houses in their valley, only it was cold, with a chill dampness. Light grey dust covered everything. Cobwebs festooned the walls. That it had not been lived in for years, perhaps generations, was evident. Theta clung to his arm, shivering and afraid. Henry shook her off. He strode to the kitchen and pulled open a bin. In the bottom was dust, smelling faintly of peaches. "We'll clean out a bedroom for the night," he said, re-entering the living room. In the bedroom the westerly sun poured light through a dust-covered window, putting the bed somewhat in shadow. It, too, was covered with dust, turning the everlasting blankets into a colour uniform with the room. Their movements stirred up dust that danced as motes in the streaming sunlight, as if to bar their way across the room. They walked into it. Their eyes could now see clearly what was beyond. Theta screamed and sprang back. Protruding beyond the upper edges of the blankets were 2 skulls. They were outside, breathing heavily, before they realized they had moved. Henry stared at the still open door, at the black hole through the white wall. It was the first time they had seen the aftermath of death. For their people, there were places into which bodies were placed. From them they vanished like all other refuse. Shaken by the horror of it, they plunged into the forest in panic. The sun dropped behind the ridge, the air chilled. Bones or no bones, they had to find shelter for the night. Fire, naked flame, they never had seen or knew existed. Heat came from the walls of houses, with warm clothing and blankets. Henry's lips firmed. Dead ones or no dead ones, they had to find something to keep them warm during the night. Another house appeared. With fast-beating hearts they entered. It was now warmer inside, but still chilly. They would still need coverings. "Stay here," Henry said. He strode into the nearest bedroom. Without stopping to look around, he stepped to the bed. Closing his eyes, he snatched off the bedding and fled into the living room. Together, crouched in a corner, the bedding around them, they spent the night. Sleep did not come immediately. Henry stared into the darkness, reviewing the day, putting together what he had discovered. "It all fits," he said aloud. "What does?" Theta asked. "The forest, the dead trees, dead people. Something happened to everything, perhaps all at once. To the defrosters, the heaters, the bins. It must have been in winter. They crept into bed to keep warm, then starved to death. All of them." "No, no," Theta cried. "But it did, and it's beginning to happen to us. Each year something stops working. The time may come when nothing works." "We can't do anything." "Yes, we can." "What?" "Find out why, and try to stop it." 3. At dawn, stiff and shivering, they stumbled outside and by unspoken consent started directly up the slope. By full daylight they found themselves in a chestnut grove. They stopped to fill their pouches. The last mile was made in the hot warmth of the sun. At the top of the ridge they stopped to rest. As they did, they feasted their eyes on the orderly groves below them. But Henry's eyes were seeking out the squares of brown among the green of the lower valley. He counted 20, far more than he realized. The defrosters had gone dead at intervals, years apart. His eyes crept up the valley to the structure at its head, with a captive lake behind it. It must be the house of the old ones the old stories told about, but no one had ever seen. From it they had worked the magic that made the valley what it was. There, they said, they could be seen and heard to speak. If he could get to see the old ones, ask them questions, perhaps they would tell him what should be done. "Where are we going now?" Theta asked. "To the house of the old ones. Up there," he said, pointing. "Perhaps they can tell us something." She clutched his arm. "You can't," she cried. They'll what?" "I don't know. Something awful." "That's what they said about the learning house, but there was nothing in it but dust. I found, from the size of the chairs, that you had to start learning almost from the time you walked. I didn't even know how to start." "Then you didn't learn anything?" "Nothing." He came to his feet. "You don't have to go if you don't want to." "I go where you go," she said with stubborn determination. They had to dip down below the force fence to find water, then keep to the harvested portions where the masters had gone to town for the winter. They were lucky in finding houses where the keys had been lost, and thus had been left unlocked. It was noon the next day when they forced themselves through the brush to find themselves within feet of their destination. With Henry leading, they skirted it, looking for an entrance. Close to the center, they found a deep indentation with a pair of doors at its inner end. Cautiously, over the accumulated leaves and rubble, they moved toward them, wondering how to get inside. The moment Henry came within 3 feet of them, they flew open, inwards. Theta screamed and sprang back. Henry stopped, startled. "It's nothing to be scared of," he reassured her. "They say that the doors of hall in town used to open this way until someone broke a glass button on the wall. Come on." There was another pair of glass doors that opened the same way as they approached. They led to a large reception room with a desk and chair opposite the door, chairs in a row along the wall. The floor was red tile with a white line about 6 inches wide, circling around to a door to the left. Behind the desk was another door. "Sightseers," said a voice from out of nowhere that made Theta scream. "We'll follow the white line through the door to the left. Those with business in the offices will consult the receptionist. Please proceed." Almost in a state of trance, Henry led the way along the white line. The door opened and admitted them, then a second door. Here, everything was spotless, dustless, though no one had been there for years. "You are now in the generating room," the voice began again. "The humidity is 0. All dirt and dust has been removed. What you bring in with you will be gone in 5 minutes. They were on a balcony, looking down into a large space. On the floor below them seemed to be a huge cylinder, suspended between 2 metal-covered blocks. Only by the glimmering reflections from its polished surface could one tell that it was revolving. "Before you is the main generator," the voice began again. "If you look closely, you will note that the armature shaft does not touch its supporting bearings. It is held in suspension by polarized barometer obtained from Mars, so there is no friction and no wear. It is powered by water reduced to hydrogen and oxygen. The excess gases are used in the hoppers and storage bins to force out the air and preserve the foods on their way to their destinations. Some gas is piped to the disposal plants, in which all organic matter is converted into fertilizer." Henry felt let down. Cheated. It was just an empty building containing soundless machinery and a recorded lecture. No old ones. Nothing he wanted. "Now behind you," the voice began again, "you can see into the control room. From there, every machine, store, or house can have its power cut on or off. and if anything goes wrong with its circuit, a button on the board flashes red until it is repaired. The glowing red button close to the window is the master switch that will shut off everything in case of an emergency, such as an earthquake." Theta pressed her nose to the glass window. "Just think," she breathed. "Push that, and everything stops." Perhaps that's what happened in the other valley, thought Henry. Someone pushed the red button, then couldn't get things going again. "Now follow the line to the next room and be seated. They will be shown how the complex of the valley was constructed and how it operates." On entering the hall, they found several rows of seats facing a large screen. Soft music began as they entered. The hall darkened and the screen lit up, showing the valley as it was before the work began. Forest mainly, a few farms scattered along the narrow bottoms. What startled Henry was that they were above the valley, looking down as they seemed to drift through the air. So the old tales were right. The old ones could fly through the air. Here was proof of it. He sat on the edge of his seat, breathing hard, waiting to see the old ones, giant of stature, who could tear a tree out of the ground or shovel away a mountain. But the first humans he saw were men like himself and those in the valley. Men who pointed at places while others squinted in that direction through strange instruments. He wished he could follow the talk, but the men pronounced words differently and used many he had never heard. He had to use his eyes instead of his ears. They started to work right where he was. He recognized the outlines of the ridges about them, but it was done by no giant extending his hand and showering magic. Big machines dug away the ground. Other things with no visible means of locomotion brought building materials up a broad road where there was not even a path now. A little man, greying and wrinkled, answered questions of their invisible guide, and, as he did, he gave directions to others. Was he one of the old ones? Not as large as himself, no older than his father? Behind him on the screen, the building Henry was in was going up, and men were making it. Ordinary men, not magic. Were the old ones just ordinary men? Their magic not strange words and motions, but machines that manipulated with their hands and feet? They were not gods. Just men who had begun to learn sitting in the little chairs in the learning house. He watched them dig the trenches from the groves to the hidden storage bins, put in the pipes lined with gravity-repellent barummel, lay the snake-like cables that he had seen occasionally where erosion had exposed them. He saw the building of town, the masters' houses, and the final planting of the groves. The record ended. Henry remained staring at the blank screen until Theta nudged him and brought him back to the present. The white line led on, past large offices on one side, on the other windows looking down into a vast storeroom that contained parts for repairing everything in the valley. The old ones knew that some day things would start breaking down, and had prepared for it. They had not prepared for life dropping into routine, interest in progress being lost. What need was there to spend years in school when everything was already done for you? The picture had shown some buildings close to the cliffs on one side that looked like the apartment houses in town. They broke through the brush and found one. Other than for dust, it was in good condition. The food bins were filled, but the contents had dried to the hardness of stone. As soon as they were emptied, they began to refill, but it was 2 days of constant emptying before eatable fruit began to appear. By the end of a week, they had the rooms they needed cleaned and some of the brush about the place cut clear. It left Henry free to roam the plant. He sat again and again through the record of construction, understanding a little more each time. He noted, for instance, where what was now forest at the entrance to the valley was once farmland, laid out in squarish, vari-coloured fields. He found his way into the control room, discovered how to trace the lines from the board to their end on the large map on the wall across from the board. One day, while it was snowing heavily above the permanent defrosters, he heard a buzzer sound and saw a light turn from green to red. He traced it down. It was the damaged house where they had first taken refuge. There was plenty of time to ponder. Each time it ended in the same question and the same conclusion. Something had to be begun before it was too late. The valley had to be stirred out of its antipathy. But how? One morning, before dawn, he sat up in bed. Theta asked what was wrong. "I'm going to the meeting in town at peach blossom time," he announced. "Something has to be done." Theta clutched his arm. "You can't. They'll kill you." "I have to. Do you want our children or our children's children to die like those people on the other side of the ridge?" "No, but—" "I have to go. I have to make them listen." 4. The Peach Blossom Time meeting was always the best in the year. Those not already in town were on the nearby bottom groves. After it, the masters would return to the upper orchards, and the youth work parties would start their rounds. During the 3-day meeting, there would be dances and parties, an exchange of news while the assembled elders would judge disputes, pass on the qualifications of masters, deposing the lazy and unfit, selecting couples to take their places. It was the one time of the year when Henry could get the ear of everyone. They travelled down unseen, slipping into unlocked houses for food and the night. They entered town at the beginning of the first meeting. They made it unrecognized to the hall. It was not crowded. The day was bland. Most preferred to stay outside and watch the proceedings on the visi-screen. Henry and Theta slipped into a section on one side and awaited the clearance of the immediate business of the elders. There was none of importance. Within an hour, all that was pending was cleared up. The senior elder, emaciated and with shaking hands, faced the audience. "Any further business?" he quavered. Henry stood up. "Yes," he called out, "something very important." Theta fully intended to follow him, but she found she could not move. It was as if she was tied to the chair. The more practical of the two, she knew that the men he was facing would refuse to face the facts. All he was doing was placing himself in their hands, and that meant death. The elders peered in his direction as he gained the aisle. Ole twisted about in his seat and was the first one to recognize him. For a moment he stared open-mouthed. "It's Henry Callis!" he cried out. "He's proscribed for learning witchery! Grab him!" Henry stopped before him. Ole's words became a gurgle and dried up. "If I'm a witch," Henry said loudly, "I'm a good person to keep away from. Whether I am or not, I have something important to tell you, and all of you had better listen." He started again for the platform, those along the aisle shrinking back as he passed. The elders, from fat to withered, with the same uneasy expressions on their faces, watched silently as he climbed to the stage and faced them. He could feel their chill hostility. He knew now that he had done wrong, but it was too late to undo it. He stopped a short distance from the table, half-turned so the audience could hear him. "I have been living in the houses of the old ones at the head of the valley, beyond the defrosters and the forest above them, and I also have been up to the top of the East Range, expecting to look over the edge of the world. But what I saw was another valley just like this one. It had a force fence, defrosters, hoppers, houses, everything this valley has, except for one thing, living inhabitants. There were people in the houses, dead people, reduced to bones, the bones of people who had died from hunger and cold when everything in their valley suddenly ceased to work. That is what sent me to the house of the old ones, to see if I could find out what had happened. I found out there that the old ones were not giants who did things with magic, but people like ourselves who used machinery to make things, just as we make clothing with machinery here in town. They had machines that could fly through the air. They could go the length of the valley in an hour in a road machine. With machines they built these buildings, dug the trenches for the hoppers, did everything. They were just men, men who had studied in the learning houses from the time they were tiny children. And I found out more. He stopped to take a quick look about the still hall. He felt the hostility. And I found out more, he repeated. I found that, in this valley, 20 banks of defrosters have already failed. 11 houses cannot be used, plus 2 taverns and 1 factory here in town. It shows that our own system is breaking down. Some day, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps not until the time of our grandchildren, everything will stop as it did in the next valley. If we want to keep living, we must start to learn how to keep these machines running. At the house of the old ones there is a vast store of parts and visograph records showing how it should be done. I ask you all to come up and see the record they have there of building the things in the valley. See the machine that keeps everything running. Then let me have a band of youths to start studying the records until we find out how to keep things running. There was silence after he finished. The elders eyed him, uneasy, suspicious. From the seats of the hall came Ola's voice. "Don't believe him," he shouted. "He wants to get us up there so he can bewitch us, like he did Theta. Take him out and stone him." Someone on the other side of the hall echoed the cry. In a moment it seemed that everyone was roaring it, rising in their seats, shaking fists. The senior elder motioned to the hallmaster. He stepped forward with 2 husky assistants who grabbed Henry. "Put him in the strong room," quavered the senior elder. "Keep him there until the day for punishment." Roughly, Henry was pushed around, led out a rear door to the stage. The day of punishment. 3 nights and 2 days to live. He awoke the morning of the 3rd night feeling cold. He opened his eyes to find himself in total darkness. For a moment he thought himself free, hiding out in some deserted building, that all that had happened lately was a dream. But from outside he heard a panicky voice crying that the lights in his apartment were out and it was getting cold. It had happened. Far sooner than he expected. It had happened. But what would Theta do? She had gotten away, he was sure, as no one mentioned her. Theta, that was it. She had gone to the plant, pushed the button, condemning herself and all the others to death. But that was not like Theta. She was too clever. That was it. Why hadn't he thought of it? It was a message, a challenge, a tool which he could use to free himself, get them to help him. More relaxed, he lay back. Dawn was already showing up over the ridge. More people would be getting up, more people rushing out into the streets in panic. They would remember him, come to his cell imploring him to do something. He would demand what he wanted. They could comply or face disaster. What should he demand? Someone came down the street shouting for the senior elder. The volume of excited voices increased with each minute, voices demanding to know why there was no light, no heat, no water, asking each other if they had them, hysteria mounting each minute. Perhaps it would be a time before they thought of him. but they would be before him before the day was over. "It's that witch in the strong room!" bellowed Ola's voice outside. "He did it by magic! Kill him before he strikes us all dead!" The cry was taken up. "The witch! Kill the witch! He did it! He is right in there! Kill him!" Cold terror seized Henry. Theta's scheme was backfiring. There would be no reasoning with a superstitious, hysterical mob. Well, at least it hurried things up by a few hours. More composed, he came to his feet as they burst through the back door of the hall and stampeded towards the door to the cell. He even smiled slightly. If they thought him a witch. The key was in the lock. They had no difficulty getting in. He stood in the center of the room, the slight smile still on his lips. He raised his forearm to a horizontal position, pointed his index finger in their direction. "Who wants to die first?" he cried above the noise they made. The onrush into the cell stopped abruptly, those in front pushing back against those behind them. They followed his finger with fascinated eyes as he fanned it across the group of them. He stopped, his finger pointing to a fat, apple-cheeked grove master. The man shrieked, turned about and began fighting his way back into the corridor. One man was tripped up and fell. There was a wild shriek of terror. Men shouted that he was killing the leaders by magic. To Henry it seemed only an instant before the passageway was back in its usual silence. He stepped out of his cell. He could see a mass of people about the street door surrounding the panicked men. The passage in the other direction seemed empty. He turned that way, passed onto the rear of the stage, felt his way across it in the darkness to the steps and down into the aisle. Calmly and without haste, he passed through the front doors into the next street and walked, unrecognized in the half-light and excitement, out of town. It was dark when he arrived in the upper valley. Theta was sitting at a table. She sprang up and rushed into his arms with a glad cry. "It worked! They let you go?" He looked about. "You turned the power back on?" "No. The plant in these buildings have a separate power source of their own. I wasn't going to touch it until I knew you were safe." He drew an apple from a bin and munched it. "We'd better turn things on again before the fruit spoils. Come on." The button, Henry knew, turned on as well as off. Henry pressed down the button, stepped back to watch the large battery of lights flash on, but nothing happened. Had Theta somehow wrecked? The red buttons all began to glow again. Then, a minute later, a bank of lights switched to green, then another and another. But Henry noted that an occasional light did not change. Within the hour, the board was lighted up completely. Henry could barely stumble back to his quarters as the reaction set in, compounded with disappointment. He flung himself on his bed. "I have failed," he kept muttering. "I have failed in everything. They won't listen. No one will." Theta wisely kept silent and covered him up. On the second day, they heard the sound of a group breaking their way through the forest. They slipped into the brush, ready to retire to a hiding place they had ready. But the dozen people who appeared in the clearing did not have the look of a vengeful mob. Several were almost elderly. Some were boys. 2 were young women. Henry stepped into the open, but not too close to them. "What do you want?" he demanded. They looked at each other, waiting for the other to speak first. "What do you want?" Henry directed his question to an elderly grove master. "I want to know what's happening," he began. "My hopper has stopped working. My defrosters were dimming. They blame me." A young man, strong, with alert eyes, stepped forward. "You are right about that other valley," he said. "I have been in it myself. I don't want that to happen here. I want to learn." "I do too," shrilled one of the teenagers.
I sneaked into a learning house too, but I couldn't understand." The others gave their reasons, all varied, but with the same intent. They wanted to learn. Sometimes how to repair an individual object, others longed for general knowledge. But they were willing to face the rest of the valley with him to get it. Henry took a deep, happy breath. There would be others. Slowly but surely the group would grow. "Come in," he said. "Rest and eat. Then we'll start making plans."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. The Birds and the Bees by David E. Fisher. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, August 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I was wandering among the tall grass of the slopes, listening to the soft whistling of the wind, allowing the grass to caress my toga and thighs. It was a day soft and clear, a day accepted by the young, cherished by we old. Across the gently undulating hills stood the magnificent Melopolis, encradling the oracle of Delny. I do not, of course, believe in the gods per se. Still, there is a grandeur in the very stones that transcends their human sculptors, and it is no wonder to me that many cling tenaciously and ignorantly to the old religion. Cling to the gods of old, who drew man upward from wherever he began, in whose names man killed and plundered while struggling up, in whose names man finally left this earth to seek his cousins among the stars. But of course there were no cousins. There was nothing. And man returned and settled down to live, saddened but resigned and content to live in peace with his knowledge and his power. Gone now are all the ancient evils, wars, emergencies. "See us! See us!" and they were upon me. That is, Zion was upon me, but I knew that where Zion is, Melia must soon appear, and indeed it was but a moment before Melia slipped through the high grass to stand at his side. Their youthful voices were babbling in excitement. Melia was a she, with the swelling breasts that were, so tradition states, quite prevalent among members of the race long ago, and are seldom seen today. Indeed, Melia was on this account made the butt of many jokes, and, I fear, would have had a lonely life of it had it not been for the friendship of Zion. "See us," they were saying. "The Maternite's gone." I stared in amazement. "Gone? It cannot be gone. It has always been." "Oh, my gods!" Zion shouted. "I tell you, it's gone. Will you?" Melia interrupted him quietly. "Zion, will you lose all respect for the elder?" Then turned to me and said calmly, "The watcher at the Maternite machine, it appears, has been drunk. The heat rose above the warning, continued to rise, and then, poof! Everything has evaporated in Maternite. All the pre-life is gone." "All of it?" I asked. "There is nothing left," Melia insisted. "Can more be made? And if not, what will happen with no more children?" "That is for the priests to say, not I," I replied. "In moments of emergency, it is wise to speak with caution. That is, I suppose so. I have never before been in a real emergency. A man my age does not hurry in the heat of the midday sun. Madug's Englishmen go out in the midday sun, as the ancients say, although I often wonder why. But Zion and Melia run all the way down to the city. They are of an age to enter manhood, and have all the energy such young men do. As we entered the city, we were surrounded by confusion and consternation. And can the simple people be blamed? They were aware that they stood in the midst of an unprecedented happening, indeed, an emergency. For a machine had failed. Not in the memory of the eldest among us has a machine failed. They were created so long ago, indeed, that the ignorant believe them to have been constructed by the gods themselves, and never, so far as I know, has one failed. Small wonder that the watcher has been negligent. Indeed, the watcher is more of a tradition than a necessity. Besides, had he been sober, he would not have known what to do, for who knows the mysterious workings of the machines? I hastened to the city halls and found the conclave assembled, waiting for me to bring them to order. Zion and Melia stopped as I mounted the steps, but I smiled and motioned them in. They accompanied me past the marble pillars into the cool recesses of the hall, then seated themselves on the floor as I took my place by the great table. Well, you know how these things are. At such a time, many men feel impelled to make speeches, and one must not be disrespectful. Prayers and supplications were offered to the gods, priests were sent to sacrifice, and finally, as the light of the sun was falling between the pillars, the high priest of the Maternite machine was heard. He rambled through the customary opening remarks, and then, continually smoothing his white beard, of which he is excessively proud, approached the crux of the matter, and the conclave finally heard the facts it had assembled to hear. But this time, unfortunately, many of the conclave had departed for home and supper. Yet, perhaps it is for the best, for those left were the most earnest and intelligent. "I would not bore you," he said, "with details of which only the gods are sure. Know, then, that once granted a few cells of pre-life, it is an easy matter for the Maternite machine to add more and more, thus assuring us, as has always been, a continuous source of pre-life to be borne by the generating machine as children. The machines bear the exact number of children each year to balance the number of us whom the gods claim. Such it has always been from time immemorial." A murmur of assent and approval of these virtuous words whispered around the hall. "But now," he continued, however, with less assurance, and indeed with even a stutter here and there, "an unprecedented situation has arisen. Indeed, I might call it an emergency, for the Maternite machine has actually failed." Cries of treason sprang up, and I fear it might have gone hard for the priest had I not been able to ensure order. "That is not the worst," he cried, as if in defiance. "All the pre-life has been dried up. It will not function. There is no more. And there will be no more children." At this I feared the conclave was about to riot. It is at such times that I most revere the wisdom of the ancients, who decreed 70 years the minimum age for a member of the conclave. They shouted and began to beat their fists, but for how long can a man of 70 years roar like a youngster? They quieted, breathing heavily, and I asked, "Is there no way, then, to produce more pre-life in order that the machines may produce more children for us?" "As I have said," he replied, "give the machines but a bit of pre-life, and they will produce more. But take away that least bit, and they are helpless." Such heresy could have brought a sad end to the priest, had not the conclave been so exhausted by the events of the day. We leaned back to think. Roxates leaned forward and asked, Must there not have been a beginning to pre-life? For the machine, it seems, cannot make it, and yet it came from somewhere." "Riddles are not called for," I answered severely. "Are not riddles often the beginning of knowledge?" he asked, in that irritating dumber-than-thou attitude of his. "Must there not, long ago, have been a source of pre-life, a source now forgotten, and may it not even now, should we discover it, be available to us? I am reminded of the story of the animals of old." "I fear your mind is wandering, Roxates," I was forced to interrupt. "I know well the legend of the animals, but what does it have to do—" The heads of the conclave were turning to me quizzically. I hastened to explain the legend of the animals. "It is said that many thousands of years ago, time without reckoning, there existed on the earth creatures who were alive like us, and yet not like us. It is said they had 4 legs or more, and no arms, were covered with hair, and although not mute, they could not speak." Roxates' voice made itself heard. "It is true. Such creatures did indeed exist. It is recorded most scientifically in the films." "If it be so," I said, quieting the hubbub that followed, "and I would not doubt your word, Roxates, for all know you are the wisest of men. If it were so, then, what of it?" "May it not be," Roxates put in, "that these animals had no machines to reproduce their kind? For surely the gods would not grant machines to such creatures, and indeed, if they had maternite machines, why then we would yet have these animals among us." "And how, then, did these animals reproduce?" I asked. "How indeed? And is there not a legend, admitted only a legend, that says there was a time before the machines, and before the maternite machine, and that at such a time both the animals and men reproduced from within their own bodies?" At this, 2 members of the conclave fell immediately into a faint, and I would gladly have joined them. I hoped that the youngsters, Zion and Melia, had not heard, but as I turned they were listening most attentively to Roxates, who, amid cries of heresy and treason, went on. "I should like to ask the conclave for permission to search the ancient records, in the hope of finding some such knowledge that would prove or disprove my words." "You wish to search the films?" I began. "Not the films, Zeus, but the books." Gods, this Roxates! The books, as well he knows, are so ancient and so delicate that they are kept in an air-tight tomb, lest, being handled, they be destroyed and all knowledge within them lost. Therefore they have not been read in the known history of our race, and Roxates has been anxious for an excuse. "Zeus," he went on, "if there exists such knowledge as I seek, is it not indeed lost to the memory of man? And if so, are not the books the only place where it may be found?" Roxates, it is suspected, will never ask a question unless he knows the answer beforehand. And so I acquiesced, and agreed, and granted permission. And with much misgiving and foreboding of evil, the conclave adjourned. Several weeks elapsed before Roxates requested that the conclave meet. I called the meeting at dawn, and so it was yet early in the afternoon when formalities were concluded, and Roxates granted leave to speak. "Some of those among you are shes," he began, "and you know you are different from the rest of us. To the advantage, your skin is fairer, and your features more often handsomer than ours. To the disadvantage, your excretory system is not so mechanically dexterous as ours. And, you may say, why should this not be so? There is, indeed, no reason why we should all be identical. Perforce you have the advantage, perforce we do. Yet there is one other distinction. Some among you shes have the swelling of the breasts, and does there exist no reason for this? Was there not, perhaps in ancient times, a cause for this? Do you not wonder, shes, whence you come, and for what reason?" "Roxates," I interrupted, "all this is fascinating, of course, but if you could be quick—" "Of course," he replied,
In the course of my reading I have read many books, and while they are all vague on the subject, this I have discovered, that there was indeed a time before the machines. In fact, the books were created in that time, for not one of them mentions the machines. Then reproduction was carried on by individuals, without help of the then non-existent machines. The shes are not wanderers from another land, but they have lived with us for all time. They are not another race, but we are all types of one race, and the fact of reproduction is somehow intimately related to the physical distinctions of the shes. These last sentences were shouted to be heard above the roar of the crowd. Yet, when Wroxetes stopped, so also did the noise, so shocked and amazed at his words were they, and I confess, myself also. In fact, Wroxetes added, sitting down, this process of reproduction seems to have been so simple that it was once a problem of overpopulation. Order was lost among the conclave as each man turned to speak to his neighbour, and for some time I could not restore order. I realized that something had to be done to save Wroxetes before the outrage of the assembled overwhelmed him. "It seems," I shouted, "that there is a flaw in your logic." For if such there was, I was hopeful of dismissing the entire affair with no harm done. For if people reproduce too often, why then this reproduction must have been a pleasant thing to do, otherwise they would not have done so to excess. And if it was a pleasant thing to do, where is the necessity for the machines, and why were they created? Wroxetes seemed perplexed by this problem, whereupon Xeon, who together with Melia were at the conclave without permission, shouted, "Perhaps the process of reproduction was of such a pleasure that the conclave ruled it to be a sin, and therefore the machines were necessary." At this impudence the conclave dissolved in an uproar, and I was beyond power to restrain them from placing Xeon under arrest. Privately, however, I had to admit that his supposition was a possibility, and thus I authorized Wroxetes to continue his search. Now indeed I was sorely worried concerning Xeon, for he must languish in the dungeon until the conclave is satisfied to release him, and this they cannot do until they meet again. I needed a sufficient excuse to call a meeting of the conclave, whereupon I might argue for the lad. When I heard that Wroxetes again desired audience, I immediately proclaimed a meeting of the conclave to be held the next day at dawn, and so that night slept well. The conclave had come to order, and formalities had been initiated when Wroxetes entered and took his place. He clutched under one shoulder a thin rectangular object, but that is not what impressed me. His appearance. He looked as if he had not slept of late, nor eaten either. His eyes were sunken, and his features had doubled in age. He was bent and tired. But it was his eyes. There was a horror in them. I was shocked, and could not help staring at him. And then the formalities were over. I intended to speak for Xeon, but Wroxetes was on his feet, and I gave way. "I have indeed discovered the secret of reproduction," he began. "After many searchings, I came upon this," and he held forth the object he had carried in. "It is a book. It is entitled Living a Normal Sex Life. It seems to be some sort of a do-it-yourself pamphlet." He dropped the book on the table and rubbed his hands over his eyes. There was something in the man's behavior that commanded everyone's attention. He went on, speaking low. "The word sex is not defined, but it seems to mean—" His words trailed off. He was obviously unsure of how to continue. "I had better start at the beginning, I suppose," he said. "You see, once upon a time there were birds and bees." When he finished, the conclave sat in horrified silence. His words, with all their horror, had the ring of truth, and there were no cries of heresy. There was only stunned disbelief, and the beginnings of nausea. It is the mark of honour that a leader shall carry on when others fear to move. I cleared my throat. Shall not these organs which you mention have atrophied by now? With no use throughout all these generations, will they not have evolved into nothingness? I do not think so, Roxates replied after a while. What to us is an aeon, to evolution is but an instant. And then the swelling of the breasts, I believe, proves that there is still reproductive activity in some, at least, of the shes. We sat, shaking our heads, bowed under terrible reality. Then we must experiment, I said. But whom could we ask to submit to such horror? I have already taken the liberty of asking for volunteers, Roxates replied. The she, of course, must be one with a swelling of the breasts. Melia has volunteered, on condition that Zeon be released from dungeon. Are there any objections? There were none, of course. Who would refuse a boon to one who would undergo such an ordeal for the city? And who will be the partner? I asked. In all honour, could Zeon allow Melia to surpass him in courage? It shall be he, Roxates said. And with his word the two entered the hall and stood, noble and naked. Roxates gestured to the table, and Melia started to climb upon it, but Zeon stepped forward. My lords, he said, would not better results be obtained were we to conduct the experiment in the fields before the oracle of Delny, that the gods may help us? His glance reached into my soul, and I was proud of Zeon. A true friend, he thought even now of the comfort of Melia. The marble table was indeed hard, and from Roxates' description it seemed that Melia's position would be as uncomfortable as it would be undignified. The soft fields might be some slight help. I voiced my assent, and the entire conclave adjourned to the fields. It was nearly dark when we walked home, Roxates and I, arm in arm. It had been a horrible day. The inhuman indignity, the cries. We tarried before my home, leaned on the stone, stared at the first stars. They seemed finally to accomplish all the book described, I muttered. They may indeed have succeeded, Roxates replied. There is mentioned a time-lapse which is necessary. The child does not appear immediately. It doesn't matter, I said disconsolately. Who could ask them to go through such an ordeal again? And then I looked down to earth again, and saw them standing before me. Melia cast her eyes down, and would not raise them. Zeon held his arm about her shoulders, as if to protect her, but I know not from whom. See us, he said, then stopped, embarrassed. I waited, and Roxates was silent, and he continued. See us, we come to tell. We will— He raised his eyes to mine, and said manfully, We shall try again. I'm afraid that tears came to my eyes. Such sacrifice! We beg one favour, Zeon went on. We are agreed that, well, we should like to be left alone, in private, to try. Of course, I replied. Anything they might want they could have. My relief and gratitude must have showed, for Zeon took a deep breath and spoke again. We do not deserve praise, Zeus, he said. The truth is, we sort of enjoy it. I watched them turn and wander off together under the stars. My heart has a warmth in it, and I no longer fear for the future of our race when our young people can show such nobility and sacrifice.
The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. World Without War by E.G. von Wald. Originally published in If, Worlds of Science Fiction, September 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Mark knew he shouldn't stop. He was already late for Jeanette's birthday party, but the sight of 3 people out in the open like this was too much. He pulled around and hovered over the undulating flow of glassy magma frozen on its way to the long, dry Potomac riverbed with its shallow caverns and fascinating mile-wide potholes. Just under an overhanging cliff of half-vitrified soil were 2 cars, obviously damaged. The 3 men were standing beside them. Mark laughed out loud. It was not often that one found 3 people at once, and so close to each other. The scene there, with the long slanting rays of milky sunlight glancing off the ribbing of the flats and sparkling through the million brittle shards of collapsed debris, filled him with a certain poetic exultation. "By the stars," he murmured to himself happily. Bubbling with good humour, he slipped down a little closer to the hole, staying up hard against the overhanging cliff. He was feeling too cheerful to use his rightful advantage over them, and decided to use a handgun, since they had nothing better. This was a mistake, of course. He was only moving along at 100 miles an hour now, too slow for safe shooting, particularly with the bumpy air in the hole. But he happily disregarded this, as he pushed open a viewport and blazed away with a Zuz pistol. Almost immediately, the ship lurched in the uneven air, and he could see the tiny thin trace of violet as it swept up and away off the targets. One of the men went down, sliced cleanly in 2, but the others had seen him. Mark cursed mildly, some of his high good humour gone, and pulled the car about for another run. The chronometer pinged warningly at him, notifying him that he was now a full hour late for Jeanette's birthday party, but the code required the second try. There was nothing that required hand weapons for this, however, and he slipped his strong young hands around the main gun control. A single burst of violet, and one of the men vanished in a puff of steam. Good and clean, he told himself with satisfaction. But the last man opened his pistol onto broad beam, burning a red flare of general destruction at him. Mark veered around and bore down sharply for the last burst. He had to get it over with and onto Jeanette. But the deadly broad beam swept below the car, evacuating the air and throwing the vehicle momentarily out of control. Close behind, the cliff became suddenly alive as the beam engaged it, bubbling and spewing out huge gouts of molten rock. The air car burst into a brief, brilliant, sodium-coloured fire and fell, with Mark burning inside of it, yelling and screaming in pain. It took almost 5 seconds before the charred brain of Mark's body stopped functioning. Then it released him. He was conscious of the humming of his transmitter. Almost immediately, the remembered pain brought perspiration running down inside the helmet into his eyes. He reached up and removed the headpiece with unsteady hands, groaning softly. It had been some decades since he had last been involved in trouble like this. Killed, yes, but in a painless, fair fight. Being burned to death was no joke, and that body had been one of his best, with the finest reflex sensory system manufactured. The machine purred softly beside him. He thought suddenly and emptily of Jeanette, and stood up. "Damn," he muttered, crossing the floor, feeling the pleasant warmth of the soft plastic under his feet. "Damn, damn, damn." He stopped before the transparent cover of a storage cabinet, gazing sourly at its contents. 11 humanoid forms were stiffly erect behind the cover, all broadly resembling him in feature, and differing only in such minor things as height, hair, perhaps the colour of the eyes. Each bore the scars of some past clumsiness or accident. "Damn," Mark said again. That was the only decent body I had to wear. Now what do I do? He went into the next room and bathed himself in the tepid perfumed mist that fell perpetually from its domed ceiling. If it were anybody but Jeanette, there would be no problem. He just would have to shoot off a quick RT, explaining the situation and excusing himself. Nobody would have minded, least of all himself. Particularly a no-fight affair like this one was supposed to be. But not Jeanette. Ooh, Jeanette. Mark grinned and rubbed the pleasant fluid over his well-cared-for skin. Oh yes, Jeanette. There was something about Jeanette that he could not quite put his finger on, but it was good. It was wondrously good, like the bodies she wore. No matter what it was always perfect. She just had the knack of dressing well. Idly he wondered what her proto-body was like. There must be some resemblance, of course. That was the law. Identification was very important, and few manufacturers would violate that, even as a simple matter of good taste. But there still would be considerable difference. As he thought about it, he got a strange, wistful feeling that he did not quite understand. There was a sort of sadness about it. Jeanette seemed oddly different from other people. He liked her much too much. Guiltily, he brushed the thoughts aside. Anyway, it didn't matter, he told himself. Due to his carelessness in that last fight, he probably wouldn't even see her tonight, since he had nothing to wear. He stalked out of the shower and gazed again at the bodies in the storeroom. The only halfway decent one there was that 6-foot black fellow with the little ears. It used to be his favourite, until he got it smashed one night during a party at his nearest neighbour's. A half-smile tugged at Marks's lips as he recalled the incident. That had been a no-fight party, too, but he had managed to smuggle in a small bomb and set it off right in the middle of the main bedroom. There were at least 10 couples there, since it was a big party, and none of them lived. The trouble was, Mark had been pretty badly smashed up himself, and just managed to get away without losing his body. Now the thing was all scarred up and practically useless for anything except manual labour. Mark shook his head disgustedly. There was nothing to do but send off the RT to Jeanette. But this was her birthday. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection from his transmitter housing, and automatically straightened his shoulders a little, then laughed at his image. Then he stopped and contemplated himself further. There was one thing he could do. Many years before, he had an exact duplicate of himself produced when the vogue for copper-coloured bodies was at its height. Since then, the fashion had changed back to the pink, but that old job must still be around somewhere. He hated to do it, though. He had never liked that body. It had been just too accurate, and every time he wore it, it embarrassed him. It had been almost as if he were going outside in his proto-body, which, of course, nobody did. People used their own bodies hundreds of years ago, but it was most uncivilized. Besides, it was tiring, and dangerous too. Yet, was it more fun? He wondered. He simply had to make Jeanette's party. Otherwise he wouldn't see her for months at least, and the thought of that made him feel funny in his stomach. Mark grinned again, admiring her image in his mind, and set about his catalogue to find the fundamental frequency of that old copy of himself. Fuse it, he told himself resolutely. Nobody would know it was an exact duplicate. He located the data and set it up in the transmitter. He had no idea where the body was, but that would take care of itself if it were still in good shape. Placing the helmet on his head, he punched the controls and relaxed back on the table. 2 levels below, under a pile of dust-covered trash, the body became suddenly conscious. Mark opened his eyes and looked around, recognition slowly returning. He had forgotten all about this old room, but then one could hardly remember everything about a full shelter system, what with the hundreds of compartments, endless automatic equipment, and innumerable connecting passages. Whoever it was who built this one sure had liked complexity. He bathed and carefully braided the long blue-black hair, simulating somewhat the fashion of the day, and spent some time adjusting a purple scarf over his left shoulder. The purple scarf was sort of a trademark with him, and Jeanette always admired it. Purple was her favourite colour. He made a joke out of it and called it their colour, which was typical of the strange, dangerous behaviour she engendered in him. Mark was a little worried as he plunged up toward the stratosphere in his extra car. This time he kept clearly in his mind the fact that this was his last serviceable body, and he could take no chances with it getting ruined. Even if he saw a whole multitude of people all clustered together, he would ignore them, he told himself. Halfway there, however, he spotted a peculiar marking on the scope and detoured. The peculiar marking followed him. Anxiously he looked out a clear view panel, but could see nothing in the cold, mist-laden night. The marking grew more definite as he hesitated. It was another car, and there could be no question what it was after. A shot at Mark. He cursed and sucked in his breath, making quick calculations. There was a rolling billow of cobalt fog off to one side, a whole bank of the stuff. Somebody apparently had been having a little game nearby. It was still hot enough, according to his indicators, to discharge anything the other car sent after him, and it would have the added advantage of being invisible to the other man's instruments. The only trouble was, once in the fog, he couldn't see anything either, and could be ambushed without difficulty on the way out. The marking on the scope became more definite, and the question settled itself as the other car came between Mark and the cloud. Growling with irritation, Mark swung around and sent a wide-angle beam in the direction of his pursuer, watching nervously as the indicators described the pitiful short range of his fire at this setting. The assailant veered off, however, scurrying into the cobalt cloud. Mark grinned. He knew the man would expect him to wait for him to come out, so he swooped down at max acceleration toward the surface. In 5 minutes he was signaling into Jeanette's shelter for permission to enter. There were servants everywhere, mechanical things, controlled by electronics and not alive, although they looked it. This was Jeanette's specialty. She owned a factory that manufactured them for mining on the scalding plains of Mercury, and these had been superficially remodeled to act as servants. There was the usual government man there, too, running the party. He strutted around under his official sash with ill-concealed self-importance. "Hey you, there, wait a minute," he called to Mark, waving a Zaz pistol in his direction. "Yes?" Mark hesitated, eyed the pistol, and obeyed. "That scarf, get it off," the man ordered sternly as he approached. The Zaz pistol was level and steady. "Why?" Mark demanded. "It's just a scarf. I always wear one." "You know why," the other man said coldly. "This is a teetotal party. If I let somebody slip a weapon or something in, it would be an awful brawl in no time. You know how people are." The man was right, of course. You can conceal a lot of things in the fabric of a sheer scarf. Reluctantly, Mark undid the catch and handed it over. "Okay, you can pick it up at the entrance when you leave." The officer's amused eyes wrinkled as he looked Mark up and down. "Say, that's a pretty nice job you've got there, man. Mind if I ask who made it?" "It's pretty good," Mark said cautiously. "It's custom-made to a private specification." The officer grinned good-naturedly. "Sure, I understand. That's all right. I'm not from the revenue department. I don't have to do anything about bootlegging." "I don't mean that," Mark protested. "There's nothing illegal." The man waved his disregard away. "Forget it. It's a nice one, though, and that copper colour's coming back soon, too. Those fashions run in cycles, you know. Yes, Mark murmured diffidently. I thought so, too. Sure. The officer eyed it speculatively for a moment. 2.01 centimetre navel, isn't it? They're the best, of course. Mark nodded shortly, looking away from the talkative officer, hoping he would stop. But the man went on. And I don't have any use for these new non-feeders they've been coming out with recently. No, Mark mumbled. It's all right to fix it so that the food is not necessary, and it really is a bother to have to feed those old models whether you want to or not, but sometimes you'd like to eat something just for the fun of it, and with the non-feeder models there's no receptacle for it. Mark nodded, his eyes searching the huge anteroom, gazing hopefully between the moving ranks of robot servants. Then he saw her and caught his breath. Jeanette. His lips formed a low whistle in time-honoured acclamation of excellence. The officer followed his gaze and agreed. Yes, he said in a low voice, that girl is really something. Private spec for everything, and she sure knows how to use it. Take that little golden job she's wearing tonight. Nothing to it, but with her it's terrific. He was right. Jeanette was wearing a slender, soft-looking golden little body that Mark had never seen before, but it was a real prize. Being hostess, she could have clothes on, and sported a half-dozen little bracelets and a jet-black bandana around her throat. The thing was draped down over her left breast, and the whole effect was really quite stunning. "Oh, Mark," she explained, running up with an odd sort of breathlessness. "You're late." "Sorry, Jeanette," he replied. "Ran into a little trouble and had to go back for another body." "You must have missed," she said with amused accusation. "I'm surprised at you." "Oh, there were 3 of them," he protested, "and the last one used a broad beam." "Never mind, I forgive you," she told him. "Come along, let's go look at my garden." Mark grinned happily. "Wonderful idea, but what about your guests? Are you just going to leave them like that?" "This is my birthday," she said. "They can amuse themselves." Then she pulled him down and put her lips to his ear. "Besides," she whispered, "I've got an identical copy with electronic works. No one will even know I've left unless they get too friendly with it." "Pretty clever," Mark admitted thoughtfully, "but I wouldn't always be so ready to break the law like that." "Who's to know except you, Mark?" She looked up at him with burning, gold-flecked eyes. "You wouldn't tell anybody, would you?" Mark shook his head uncomfortably. "All right, then." They entered the elevator that took them down another half-mile to the central living quarters of the ancient shelter. It had been built early in the flux period and remodelled several times. It was one of the best equipped on the planet. "Tell me," Jeanette said, gazing appreciatively at the heavy bronze shoulders, "where on earth did you get that?" It was just lying around somewhere," Mark mumbled. "I bet," she said, "but it's nice. I like it." Mark just grinned at her, happy for the moment, secure in the knowledge that it would be impossible for her ever to know that it was really identical with his proto-body. Not that it would matter, just so long as it was artificial. He listened to the humming of the elevator for a few minutes. When it stopped, the door vanished, and the 2 of them moved out into a sea of wild, colourful beauty. High above them was a simulated sun that made as good a substitute for the real thing as had been developed since the underground movement. "Bright," Mark commented. "Oh, that's right. I've been forcing some Venerian puffers and scent flowers and raised the radiation level 10 decibels. They always do well under a strong sun, you know." She left his arm and moved to a control panel beside the entrance to the elevator. She manipulated something and the sun dimmed a little. "There," she turned around. "Better?" Mark looked at the landscape, then back to her. He grinned. "Too much light." "Oh, you!" she murmured. She touched the controls, and the sun disappeared, being replaced by a huge, mellow moon that sailed majestically on the simulated horizon. It was impossible to tell it from the real thing. "How's that?" "A little dark." Ignoring his comment, she came back and took his arm, and they went strolling across the flowers and grass. "Don't you like my moon, Mark?" "Sure, it's fine. Sort of aphrodisiac, of course, but—" "Isn't that what it's for?" Jeanette asked innocently. "I don't know. I never had a moon." "Let's sit down here," she said abruptly. They were eating pomegranates, biting briefly into them and sucking on the sour juices. The moon had risen higher during the past hour, becoming a little smaller in appearance. It was a peaceful, contemplative scene. Jeanette snuggled up against Mark, thoughtfully tracing a design with fruit juice on his arm. "This is fun," she said softly. "So much more fun than the usual things a person has to do." "Oh, you know, checking reports from the factory, making sure there is plenty of ammunition all the time, pestering the body manufacturer so you'll always have something decent to wear, always watching, or somebody will sneak in and blow up part of your shelter." "Yeah, well, guess that's life." Jeanette sighed and picked up another fruit. "It gets so tiresome, always having to keep on the lookout and fighting people. Don't you get bored by it?" "Sure, sometimes. It's got to be done, though. Otherwise you couldn't tell what might happen." "Mark?" Jeanette said hesitantly. "Yes?" "Mark, would you shoot me if you found me outside your shelter?" She looked coyly up at him. "Well, sure, unless you had a proper government-authorized permit to be there." Mark turned astonished eyes on her. "What else could I do?" "Oh, but you know I wouldn't do anything to harm your place." "Oh, Jeanette," Mark said uncomfortably. "Of course you would. Anybody would. If people started acting like that, the whole balance would be upset." She gently stroked his arm where the fruit juice had dried. Her face crinkled up, and she giggled. "Maybe you just don't know me." "Let's talk about something else," Mark suggested. "What's the matter? Do I shock you?" Mark laughed and brushed his lips against her shoulder. "I'm pretty hard to shock, especially by you." "See?" she replied archly. "You're just as antisocial as I am." Mark's face clouded. "It's nothing to brag about, though." "I'm not bragging." She sighed again and resumed her fruit. Eyeing it speculatively, she said, "I guess I'm just bored with life, that's all. Sometimes things seem so silly, like all the times you have to get a new body. You'd think the manufacturers were giving them away free." "Yeah, not like it used to be. Guess business is pretty good." "Something ought to be done about it." Mark grinned mischievously. "What do you suggest? Build another factory?" "Oh, you know you can't do that. Somebody is always blowing it up." "Well, don't worry. In another 100 years or so, people will start dying off again. These proto-bodies aren't as serviceable as the manufactured kind." "Yes, but if they keep producing new people in the decanting centers, what good is that going to do?" "I don't know. Blow up the decanting centers, maybe." "Maybe," Jeanette said, glancing impishly at the man beside her. "We ought to just stop wearing these silly old manufactured bodies entirely." "Yes?" Mark tasted a pomegranate, made a face, and tried another. "Just what do you suggest people wear?" "They could go around in their proto-bodies." "What?" Mark looked swiftly and searchingly at her, alarm on his face. "Why, Mark," she laughed disarmingly, "you're such a righteous beast, aren't you?" "Great atoms, Jeanette," he said, gazing intently at her golden-flecked eyes, wondering what strange things went on inside that lovely head. You mean go around all the time as if we were savages? Why, that's illegal, immoral, and besides, it's dangerous. Suppose somebody took a shot at you. You've only got one proto-body, you know.
A clever fighter like you shouldn't have too much trouble with that, if you're careful, she said gaily. And I'm pretty good at that myself.
Mark took a slow, deep breath as he decided that she was just teasing him. I'm surprised at you, Jeanette. She shrugged.
I'm bored, I guess. I'd like to try something new, just for excitement. Personally, sometimes I think the whole social system we have is pretty silly anyway.
Atoms, Mark mumbled.
No need to swear about it, she chided him. Come on, Mark, just think about it for a minute, and be consistent.
Consistency is all right for a free sigh, he said. It sure doesn't do a proto-body any good. Jeanette laughed scornfully.
I'll bet you believe all that stuff they feed you in the decanting centre about ancient history.
Course not, Mark said defensively.
All right, then. Why follow all these rules of social conduct if there's no good basis for them?
Oh, but there is, he replied seriously. There was a big war, way back centuries before we were decanted out at centre.
Ha, said Jeanette.
Sure, and it was a whole lot of people who cooperated with each other in it. There must have been hundreds of them. It was an awfully big war. Hundreds of people, all on one side, all fighting together against the other side.
I don't believe it.
It's true, I tell you, Mark insisted religiously. Hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe even as many as 1,000, all dressed alike, with clothes, I mean, and they didn't shoot each other. They just killed the people they were fighting, the hundreds of people on the other side.
Other side of what?
Mark frowned. Oh, I guess that's just an expression. But that's what happened anyway. Before civilization got started, people cooperated like that.
That's just a whole lot of theory, Jeanette insisted. Nobody's going to make me ever believe people used to act like that. Besides, there just aren't enough people around to have all those mythical wars.
Patiently, Mark continued. I'm telling you, Jeanette, this is more than theory. There are still some records left from those days.
Prove it.
All right, that's not hard. Somebody had to build the factories, didn't they? And the decanting centres?
Robots.
Who built the first robot factory? Jeanette considered. Then she shrugged petulantly.
Oh, all right. Maybe a few people did cooperate, but not hundreds of them. People just don't act like that.
Well, they did. And of course, the obvious thing happened. Since they cooperated in some things, they cooperated in a lot of things, even fighting. That's how they could make war, you know. Not the nice social sort of fighting we do now. And you can imagine what happened. You can kill an awful lot of people awful fast if a gang gets together on it like that. If they didn't have the artificial bodies and the psi transfer transmitters to make them come alive, there wouldn't have been anybody left after a while. That cooperation is rough stuff.
Obviously, she commented dryly.
Well, that's the reason for everything then. Pretty soon the factories couldn't turn out hypnobodies fast enough, and people had to fight in their proto-bodies sometimes. But after a few centuries, the leaders began to get civilized and decided to put an end to all this cooperative killing. I guess they all got together and agreed not to cooperate with each other in anything in the future. It stands to reason, Mark concluded. People had to learn to be civilized. They weren't just born that way. It's culture.
Poof, said Jeanette critically.
All right, he growled, biting viciously into a pomegranate. Let's hear your big story, if it's so good. Jeanette stretched out her legs and contemplated her wiggling toes.
Oh, I don't know. I don't have any real ideas, but I know better than to believe that sort of nonsense. People just aren't like that, and you know it.
She hesitated thoughtfully, then continued.
Maybe a few of them got together now and then for a party or something like this, but not hundreds of them." When Mark did not reply, she laughed and said, "I guess I'm just feeling risque tonight." "You sure are," he mumbled. "Of course there are parts of the old mythology that seem rather interesting, beautiful even." "It's not mythology." "Like the part that deals with marriage." She waited. Mark dutifully echoed, "Deals with what?" "Marriage." Mark considered it. Then he shook his head. "What's that?" "See?" she taunted him. "You don't know everything like you think you do. Marriage," she explained, "was a sort of cooperative agreement that the ancient people were supposed to have entered into." "Sure, just like I said," Mark stated with assurance. "Hundreds of people did it. They got involved in this marriage agreement and made war on each other with it." "What a dope! Marriage was an agreement between just two people, and that much I might believe. 100 is too much." "It was hundreds," Mark insisted. "It was not. It was just two, and what's more, it was between a man and a woman. They lived together with their proto-bodies and agreed to cooperate together, and they made children and took care of them until they grew up." "Why, that's 30 or 40 years," Mark exclaimed. "Even the wars didn't last that long. That's really nonsense. Besides, you can only make children in the decanting centres, and it's all done by machines." "Well, maybe it is a little far-fetched, but I think it's cute." "Humph." There was a few minutes' silence. Then Jeanette said softly, "Mark?" "Yes?" "Mark, you like me a lot, don't you?" Mark squirmed uncomfortably and stared at the artificial moon. "Don't you?" she insisted. "More than you ever have anybody else?" "Well, guess that's right," he admitted lamely. "A whole lot more than I should." She reassuringly patted his hand with her little one. "That's all right, Mark. I won't tell anybody. Besides, I feel just the same way about you." Mark nodded without speaking, worriedly studying the vague markings on the bright luminous disk in the simulated sky. "Mark, don't you ever want to see the real me?" she inquired urgently. "Don't you sometimes feel kind of empty because you can never really have me, know me, because all you ever see is a manufactured thing that only somewhat resembles what I am really like?" Mark blushed. She had come a little too close to the uncomfortable truth, but he refused to admit it, at least to her. He mumbled an indistinct denial. "Are you sure?" she said, grabbing his hands, gazing intently into his eyes, forcing him to look at her. "Wouldn't you sometime like to come down to my transmitter quarters, and see and touch my proto-body, the thing I really am? Or scared? Maybe I am. That's silly." Mark swallowed and said stiffly, "Just because there is a no-fight clause in your invitation tonight doesn't necessarily mean I have to follow it, you know. You don't need weapons. I could strangle your proto-body easily." "You wouldn't," she said confidently. "You sure don't think much of me, do you?" "I think just the same of you as you do of me," she said simply. With impulsive hunger, Mark threw his arms around her, holding her tightly against him, nuzzling her, smelling the perfume of her hair, incoherently mumbling into her ear. "Jeanette, Jeanette," he sang, "I think more of you than anything. I love you. I know it's wrong, but I would never even shoot you because sometimes it hurts you, and I wouldn't want you to feel even the slightest discomfort." He stopped, took a deep breath, and added meekly, "I'm sorry." "But Mark," she whispered, "why is it really so wrong?" "You know." "Suppose I told you that this body is my proto-body right now?" she asked earnestly. "But it isn't." "It is," she said faintly. Mark's breath hissed as he gasped. Jeanette was blushing all over her body, heightening the golden colour of it. He let her go, and she slid off his lap into the shadowed grass beside him. She bit her lip. "I didn't really mean to tell you, yet." There was silence. Mark said quietly, "That's all right, Jeanette." "You aren't angry with me, are you?" "No," he said slowly. "Not angry." "Mark?" "Yes?" "Now that we're into this thing," she asked hopefully, "why don't we try this marriage agreement? You know, like the ancients did. It seems like such a beautiful thing to do when two people like us, you know." "I don't know." Mark shook his head doubtfully. "I just don't know about it." "Why not? You wouldn't have to really stay here. It could be just a secret agreement between us, and you could come and see me whenever you liked." "It all seems so unreal," he muttered. They lapsed into thought, both avoiding looking at the other. There was no sound except a faint sighing of wind in the leaves of the well-trimmed shrubbery. "Suppose," Mark said finally, "suppose other people started doing this thing, this cooperative agreement. Lots of people must want to, just like we do." "I suppose so," she admitted. "I went through this once before," he went on absently. "About 90 years ago I met this woman. She was awfully nice, clever, understood things. Not like you, of course, but still, she was very nice. I thought about it then." "What happened to her?" Jeanette asked numbly. "She died after a while. She was pretty old. Oh, we didn't do anything," he hastened to add. "We kept it all on a perfectly moral and honest plane. Never saw each other except at authorized government sex parties, like this, and all. Fought whenever we ran across each other outside. But I remember thinking at the time that some sort of agreement would be nice. We got along awfully well. I could never understand what she saw in me." "I can," Jeanette whispered. "This is just the same, only a lot more so," Mark went on thoughtfully. "And it's wrong. You know it's wrong. Suppose a lot of people started it. First thing you know, whole groups of people would be cooperating with each other again, and when they got into trouble outside, or planned an innocent little raid on somebody's shelter, they would all work together on it, and pretty soon there would be other groups cooperating in fighting back again. They'd have to. And that, of course, would be the end of civilization. Pretty soon there would be nothing left and everybody would be dead." Jeanette did not reply when he stopped. She turned her head away, but Mark could hear her uneven breathing. "We have a responsibility towards society at large. We know it. We've been well educated and we aren't savages. Neither one of us can get away from it. It might be wonderful at first, but our conscience would come out sooner or later, and the whole thing would be ruined." She rubbed her face with her cupped hands, shaking her head. "I suppose," she murmured unhappily. "You'd hate yourself for it after a while," he said. For a few minutes Jeanette stared at the grass before her feet, pulling up little blades of it one by one. Then Mark stood up, and she flashed him a small, wistful, damp smile. Together they walked back toward the elevator, stepping quietly and almost furtively on the soft ground. "If it weren't for that," he started. "I understand," she replied quickly. Taking hold of his arm, she said, "I'm sorry." "Sure," Mark grinned affectionately at her. "Come on. Let's see if they've been having any good fights upstairs." They stepped into the elevator and disappeared. The artificial moon continued its regular motion through the simulated sky. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. A Pride of Islands by C.C. MacApp. Originally published in If Worlds of Science Fiction, May 1960. Narrated
by Tom Trussel. Alyar Smith clung to the top of a tall swaying hair and squinted toward the ponderous caterpillar-shaped beast way off in the very far distance. "It's coming this way, all right," he called down to Bruce Smith, who was leaning against the base of the hair. "It's moved half the length since we first saw it." "Do you think it sees us yet?" Brew asked uneasily. From up here, 6 man-lengths above the skin, he looked even shorter and pudgier than he was. Alyar grinned down at him, then looked toward the front of their own beast. "I think so," he said. "Our eye stalks are up and signalling. The pincers aren't active, though. It must be a friend beast." "I don't see how they can recognize each other this far apart," said Brew doubtfully. "We'd better go tell Parboss." "He sees it." Alyar looked aft to where the leader of the Smith clan perched on another hare, a good shout from Alyar's. "You'd better come down," said Brew. "He clobbered Jawsmith for being in sight the last time we met another beast. He doesn't care when we're this far away." Nevertheless, Alyar climbed down. It wasn't all comfort at the top of a hare, especially when the beast felt you and twitched. "Let's go back there. He might know who it is." He started through the thick growth of shorter hair, and Brew followed. They moved carefully, listening. It would be nip and tuck if only the two of them encountered a flay. They heard a few, detoured around them, eventually reached Parboss's outpost. The leader was down from the hare, sitting with his back against it, munching dried meat. 3 spearmen with him jumped up when they heard Alyar and Brew coming, then, recognizing them, relaxed. Parboss Smith grunted and gestured toward the joint of meat beside him. "Help yourself." He eyed Alyar keenly. "That you on the hare up forward?" "Yes, boss, but I made sure I came down in time." "Don't go showing yourself again before we make contact." "I won't. Could you tell who it was?" "Looked like the Jackson beast." "Oh, we don't fight them, do we?" Alyar was a little disappointed. He'd never been in a fight. Parboss grinned. "No, but we don't trade with them either. Parboss Jackson doesn't like me." Alyar remembered something he'd heard. "Was that where you stole Marboss?" The grizzled leader filled his thick chest and chuckled. "That's right. Stole her right out from under his nose." He extended his arms, showing some scars. "Here's where he got me before I knocked him out. Here's where Ma bit me." "She bit you?" "Sure. Any girl worth stealing'll put up a fight. I had to haul her along, kicking and screaming, and fight off half the Jackson clan at the same time. It was some party." Alyar sighed, thinking what it must be like to go raiding. "I'm old enough to have a woman of my own," he mused. Immediately, Parboss glowered. "Don't you go getting any ideas here. I don't want an open war with the Jacksons. We've got enough trouble already with the Grands and the Kendys." He put a hand tentatively on his club. "You hear?" "Yes, boss," said Alyar hastily. During the rest of the day, the two beasts halved the distance between them. Near evening, Alyar led Brew, protesting, up to the Smith beast's head and down over the edge where they could see forward and remain hidden in the short hair. It was dangerous. The beast might mistake them for flays and reach up with a pincer tentacle, which could move fast, considering the size. Then the slow hunching gait stopped, and the beast settled down for the night. They went back to the thickly furred spot where the clan lived. 2 of the moons were up, and with the excitement of being near another clan, nobody wanted to sleep yet. Alyar left Brew with an audience of young people who hadn't seen the other beast yet, and went looking for the older men. They were in a clearing, rehashing stories about other clans, especially about the Jacksons, which was an old one with a fine repertoire of legends. Marbos had naturally brought the stories with her. Just now, Parbos was retelling a fascinating, if ridiculous one, about how people had originally come from another world on a beast that could fly. Alia sat and listened for a while. Then, when the icy evening rain broke up the session, went to his sleeping place in a patch of protecting curly hair. After the first sleep, when it was midnight and dry again, he sneaked to where Brew slept, hissed at him, and drew him away. "Are you game for a little trip?" "Where? You mean up front again?" "No, over to the Jackson beast, just for fun." Brew was horrified. "At night? We'd freeze. Anyway, you heard Parbos." "We can find something to put on over our own clothes and wrap our feet in leather. All Parbos said was I mustn't try to steal a girl. Nobody'll miss us for one day, and the beasts will be together by tomorrow noon. We could bring back some kind of souvenirs." "You must be crazy. What if the Jacksons caught us?" "They'd only haze us a little, if we hadn't done anything. Think of it. Besides Parbos and Marbos, only 7 Smiths have ever been to another beast." Bundled in extra garments, they sneaked to the curve of the beast's side. Brew acted as if he were going to his own funeral. When they got down to where the hair grew out horizontally, they moved out beyond the short stuff and dropped from one course emergent to another, then, finally, to the ground. Apparently no one had heard them. They ran toward the front of the beast, staying as close to the furry belly as possible, for warmth and concealment. The Jackson beast was due north, half hidden by the horizon, and hard to make out against the background of the tremendous forest where it had been feeding. Beyond the trees and a little to the right was a volcano, exhaling fiery clouds, but not muttering audibly at the moment. East of them was a river. To the west, on the far side of the beasts, another forest. It was not surprising that the two beasts had met, since they were on a narrow strip of hardened lava between river and forest. They travelled in long jumps, gradually closing the distance to the Jackson beast. Near it, they saw that it was awake, with all 4 front eye stalks and 1 pair of pincers extended toward them. They halted, out of reach. "Do you think he'll know we're not Jacksons?" Brew whispered. "I don't think they care who lives on them, just so we keep the flays down. Let him get a good look at us, and he'll see we're people." He was right, but by the time the huge appendages began to retract, the cold was getting through the clothing. They hurried for the shelter of the hair. Warm again, they chewed some of the meat they'd brought along and considered what to do next. "We'd better go along the ground to the rear," Alia said. "The men will be mostly near the front, on guard. Back there, there'll only be women and children." "But we'll be a long way from home. What if the beasts don't come together?" "Oh, they usually stop and talk, or whatever they do, for 3 or 4 days. We'll have a chance to sneak back." "Why don't we just cut off some hairs right here for souvenirs and go home?" "Don't you even want to spy on the clan?" Brew sighed unhappily. "You're not actually going to try to steal a girl, are you?" "Well, no. But it would be fun, wouldn't it?" His imagination began to percolate. "We're not far from the warm ground. That's what the first Smith did. He stole a girl and couldn't get home with her, so they lived for a whole season on the warm ground until they found a young beast and started their own clan. If you've got any crazy ideas like that, you can count me out. People who get lost from their beasts get caught by demons or outlaws or eaten by terrible animals. Next you'll be talking about going to Iron Mountain and fighting the Iron Flay. Huh. The explorers who came back with all those stories probably exaggerated to make themselves look braver. Anyway, all I'm asking you to do is climb on the back end of this beast and spy on the Jacksons. It took the rest of the night to reach the blunt rear end, which had only one pair of eye stalks and one of pincers. They went through the process of letting the beast see them again, so it wouldn't think they were flays when they began to climb, then picked a low rigid hair to start on. It was a good 4 man-lengths up, too much of a jump even in this light gravity for Broo, who missed and floated back to the ground, contorting, while Alyard tried to control his laughter. He uncoiled a rope. "You need a good lively girl to work some of that fat off you," he chuckled as he hauled Broo up. Panting, Broo pulled himself onto the hare. "You'll get me killed before I ever have a chance to get married. Do you think they heard us?" "No, we haven't heard them yet, and they're bound to be jabbering, like women always are." He coiled the rope, and they began to climb. When they were halfway up, there were squeaks and rumbles below them. They stopped, holding their breaths, while the tentacle curled toward a spot only 30 or 40 man-lengths away, and the great claw began digging at the fur. Evidently something itched there, and in a few moments they did hear the screech of a hurt flay. They resumed climbing. When the skin was level enough to walk on, they began hearing voices, the giggling of girls and the drier chatter of older women, but no men's voices. They crept forward, parted the hair very carefully, and peered out. They must have found the quarters of a very important family, for the clearing was freshly cut, and expensive woven rugs covered the skin. The walls were evenly trimmed, with several hung paintings. Sleeping places had been cut into one side and lined with soft leather from the underparts of flays. Alyar had only a glance for all this luxury, though, for within 2 man-lengths of him sat a pair of eminently stealable girls. Temptation battered at him. One, evidently the older sister, was well-muscled and lithe, but plump enough to have curves everywhere. The other was beautiful too, but more slender. They had the black hair and tawny smooth skin of the Jacksons. Each wore a short lounging skirt of dainty leather, which left few secrets. Prudence, overwhelmed, hardly put up a fight. Alyar manoeuvred Broo carefully back until he could whisper. He ignored the desperate protests. "Shut up! All you have to do is stay here and wait for me, and when you hear a commotion, screech like a flay. You can do that much, can't you?" Broo, groaning, finally nodded. A length from the clearing, Alyar chose a young hare-shoot and put the point of his spear in the tender spot at its base. He jabbed with all his weight, then dove for the clearing. The beast's involuntary twitch came as he broke into the open. The women were scrambling to their feet with cries of "Beastquake!" and right on schedule, Broo cut loose with a fine series of flay screeches. In the confusion, nobody noticed that Alyar was a stranger until he scooped up the 2 girls, one under each arm, and jumped for the fur. It was hard going, with both of them grabbing at hairs to hold them back, scratching him, and in general being uncooperative. He was panting when he reached Broo. "Here," he gasped, considerately tossing him the slender one who'd be easier to carry. "This one's yours." The plump one knew by now what was happening. Slyly, she went limp until Alyar relaxed. Then she twisted suddenly and got her teeth at his left shoulder. He yelled as she took out a respectable divot of flesh and spun her around so she couldn't reach him again. There was much screaming behind them, but no pursuit yet. Alia urged Broo to the base of the nearest eye stalk. "Start climbing." "But we'll be trapped up there." "No, we won't. Go on." They were 10 man-lengths up before a few old men and a crowd of women and children appeared at the base of the stalk. Seeing Alia's spear hand free part of the time, none acted anxious to follow them. Now they were high enough to be hurt in a fall, and the girls had prudently stopped struggling. Alias twisted her head and glared at him. "My father will feed you to the fleas." Alia grinned. "He'll have to catch us first. What's your name?" "Go to hell." He let go of the scale he was clinging to with his right hand and pinched her in a vulnerable spot. She shrieked. "If I have to keep pinching you," he said, "we'll probably fall. You'd better tell me your name." She hesitated, then said icily, "Janie Jackson." You seem to be rich girls. You wouldn't be the Parboss's daughters, would you?" Janie wouldn't answer, but the other girl did, rather cordially. "Yes, and my name's Mary Sue Jackson. Are you going to steal us and make smits of us?" "They'll never get off this eye stalk," Janie said scornfully. Alia motioned Broo higher. The figures around the base grew tiny, and the stalk tapered to only half the girth of a man. It swayed a little, and they moved around to what would be the upper side if it bent. Shouts could be heard now from farther forward. Undoubtedly the fighters would arrive soon. Broo looked nervously in that direction. "What are we going to do? Bargain with them?" "No. Listen carefully. You know about people riding a pincer? We're going to get one up here, and when it's close enough, jump onto it and ride it to the ground." Alia grinned at the protests, put his spear point between 2 scales, and jabbed. In a minute the eye stalk began to bend ponderously downward. Far below they could see the pincer tentacle starting up to meet it. "Be lively now," Alia warned. It took a while for the pincer to arrive. They jumped from 2 man-lengths, landed on the slanting horny surface, and slid. Alia, hanging onto Janie with one arm, managed to get the other around a small prong. He threw a glance toward Broo and saw that he'd made out all right too. They waited. Even though the irritation had stopped, the beast was going through the scratching after hauling all that weight to such a height. The tip of the pincer sawed deliberately at the place Alia had jabbed, and then they started down. The movement was faster than it looked from a distance. Still, it was a long way to the ground. Part way down, the beast saw them, and the claw halted. They crouched while the stalk bent to bring the immense eye directly over them. But evidently the creature was only wondering what they were up to now, for after a while the tentacle started down again. 3 man-lengths from the ground they jumped, landed, and bounded away out of reach. Men, shouting, were clinging to long hairs, but nobody was climbing the eye stalk. Perhaps no one wanted to imitate the novel descent. Closer shouts indicated a group coming down through the fur. "What now?" Broo asked. It was a reasonable question. Even if they dared go home, they'd have to parallel the whole length of this beast and could hardly avoid interception. Alia and Broo had discarded their extra clothing, while the girls were almost bare, so warmth would be an absolute necessity when night came. Alia looked northward toward the volcano. The warm ground was supposed to surround it for some distance. Maybe they could reach that before night. There wasn't much time to ponder. Men were already dropping to the ground. He picked up Janie and ran for the nearest cover, which was the forest. "Come on, we can't stay here." Broo didn't have to carry Mary Sue. She was evidently coming along regardless, even though she wailed a little, so he was able to keep up. "We're not going into the forest, are we?" he panted. "Just into the edge to get out of sight, then we'll decide." There was still a medium shout ahead when they came to the first colossal uprights, trunks so thick it would take a man many breaths to run around one, towering so high one tended to forget there were any tops. In between were smaller plants, some with flowers, that formed a thicket as dense as fir. Alia paused, thinking of the stories he'd heard about the forest, but there was no doubt about how real the danger was behind them, so he held his spear at the ready and plunged into the growth. Janey opened her mouth to scream, and he hastily muffled it with his hand. "Do you want to attract every demon in the forest?" Her eyes widened, and she quit struggling. He listened to the shouts from outside, then pointed north. "That way." Brue gaped. "But that's away from home." "We can't go home yet. Anyway, the Jacksons'll expect us to. They're moving south already. Hear them?" Inside the forest, in the deep shade, there was less vegetation, so that they were able to move easily. Whenever Janey looked ready to scream, Alia pretended to see or hear something, and by the time she was wise to that, they were out of earshot. Their luck didn't last long, though. They heard a sound, whirled, and saw a small being on a branch, watching them with malevolent yellow eyes. The girls whimpered, and Brue moaned, "A demon!" It had taken a strange shape, with 4 limbs and one other appendage that looked like a tentacle. It was covered with short black fur, very thick and fine. Just now it had a set of claws for clinging to the tree. Before they could run, it opened its mouth and uttered a curse, which sounded like meow. "Let's get out of here," Brue whispered. Alia knew better. "There's no use running. We're already cursed. The only thing is to try to appease it. Maybe we could give it the girls." Alia wavered. He'd become quite attached to Janey, though he was a little tired of being bitten and scratched, and he had gone to a lot of trouble to get her. "Let's try meat first," he decided. He got a small piece out of his pouch and extended it on the end of his spear. Heart pounding, he moved closer. The demon tensed as if to jump at them, then seemed to change its mind. It wrinkled its nose, which Alia hoped was a sign of favour, and finally stretched out its head and took the meat. It chewed daintily and swallowed. Alia let out his breath. Nothing was guaranteed, of course, but possibly. The demon said, "Meow," in a different tone. Carefully, they edged toward the open. After a few steps, Brue began to run. Immediately there was a loud meow, and he stopped. In a moment the demon came into sight, walking on the ground. Alia noticed that it had ungrown the claws. As he looked, no doubt reading his thought, it grew them again, stretched out its 2 front limbs, lengthened its body, and yawned. They started on, but weren't able to make much time until they found that the demon wanted to be carried. At the edge of the forest, it was disappointing to see how little distance they had covered. The nearest end of the Jackson beast, hunching slowly away now toward the Smit beast, was still within 3 shouts. However, no Jacksons were in sight. Again, Alia hesitated. Troubles seemed to be piling up. Still, he didn't see any choice. "We'll have to go to the warm ground," he said. The girls sobbed a little, and he frowned at them. "Now what's wrong?"
There are terrible outlaws there, and demons, and things." His patience ran out. "To hell with them. We already have one demon. Do you think it's going to share us with everything on the planet? Come on." Janey didn't insist on being carried now. Evidently she felt compromised enough to come along. They hurried, stopping only once to finish up their food. They were thirsty, but hot water was supposed to come up out of the warm ground, and anyway they could wait for the evening rains. It was dusk, and already beginning to drizzle, when they noticed that the ground under their feet was warm. This was mostly hardened lava, sloping upward toward the volcano, but with small streams and patches of vegetation. Before they found a good place to stop for the night, Brue pointed ahead. "Look! That glow!" They went forward cautiously until they could see what must be a fire with people sitting around it. Fascinated, Alia went closer. Suddenly he heard the girls scream, and simultaneously 2 pairs of rough hands seized him from behind. He wrenched desperately, throwing himself and the 2 husky men around, but not getting free. More came shouting to help pin him down and tie him with ropes. It sounded as if Brue and the girls were being similarly treated. A man who acted like the leader came running from the fire. "What have we got here? Scouts?" He began directing squads of spearmen as if he expected an attack. "2 women with them? Funny. All right. You. Who are you spying for?" "What are you talking about?" Alia demanded, as indignantly as his position allowed. "We're from the Smith clan, and we're trying to get home," he finished lamely. "Clan? From a beast? What are you doing up here, then?" "We came to keep warm." "Keep warm? Why didn't you build a fire?" We don't believe in fires." Laughter arose. "Let him up," the leader said. "He must be telling the truth. Only a flay-eater would be so ignorant." They took off some of the ropes. Alia rubbed at various bruises and abrasions, wondering whether he and Brue would be killed or made slaves. The outlaws would surely keep the girls. He wondered whether the demon were going to give up its property so easily. As if in answer to the thought, it came strolling into the light, and the leader made a sign nervously. "Damn! A black cat! Is it yours?" "A black what? It captured us in the forest." "It captured you? In the forest? Then it's a real demon." "Of course. How can you be so ignorant?" "And you're still alive?" "It hasn't hurt us yet, but it won't let us get away, and it makes us carry it. I think we're uncursed right now. I'm not sure. I sort of lost track." The man gulped and faced the demon. "Please forgive us, demon. We didn't know these people were yours." The demon looked at him scornfully and uttered a curse. People moved away, except one young spearman who stood his ground. It sounds just like a cat," he quavered. The leader knocked him spinning with a sweep of a forearm. "Of course it sounds like a cat. How do you think it would sound when it's in cat form? Do you expect it to speak Ingalls to us?" He beckoned to several women. "Bring food for the demon, and offerings of iron and jewels." He glanced at the 4 captives, and added as an afterthought, "Better feed it slaves, too." Cooked meat was easy to chew, but it tasted odd, and the fruit was completely baffling. Still, they were filling. The outlaw leader eyed the demon, which had preempted Janey's ample lap. "Where is it taking you?" Alia didn't want to admit how little he knew of the nature of things, so he said the most awesome thing he could think of. "To Iron Mountain." There were gasps.
"Oh, what unfortunate people you are," the leader said. Then, eagerly, "When will you go?" Alia thought he'd better press his luck. "It wants us to start right away. It only pretends to be asleep like that, to see if we're obedient. I seem to have gotten turned around. Which way is Iron Mountain from here?" The man pointed with alacrity. "That way. A third of the distance around the volcano. Here, we'll help you get loaded up." The girls were festooned with necklaces and pendants of rare stones, while Brue and Alia toted the food and the oddments of iron. The outlaws had hastily gathered a fabulous treasure of the metal, whole spearheads, and even a knife of it. Alia waved and smiled at the outlaws just before they were out of sight, then turned north. "We'll go up country," he said. "They won't look for us there. I'm not sure they won't follow. They probably don't know what this demon will do any more than we do." He saw some huge rocks not far away, with bushes growing on top. "Let's climb up there." When they were halfway to the rocks, incredible good fortune struck. The demon, with one hurried meow, scrambled away from Janey and ran back toward the outlaw camp. "Come on," Alia exclaimed. "Maybe we can get out of its circle of influence." They climbed the rocks and found they could see the fire. Presently they knew the demon had arrived there, for the distant figures scattered. Moments later, faint laments drifted to them. They spent the rest of the night awake and watchful. "The outlaws will surely be after us now," Brue said, "to get back all this treasure." "Mary Sue and I want to be near our clan," said Janey, "even if—" She blushed. "You make smits out of us. The two beasts would meet once in a while, and we could visit." Alia looked eastward, where numerous glows marked other outlaw camps. The volcano was a barrier to the north. The outlaws would bar the way to the south, expecting them to head home to the beasts. The only direction left was west, and he found that it pleased him. "I guess we'll just have to visit Iron Mountain," he said. "Then we'll be such heroes that Parbosses Smith and Jackson will have to forgive us." The girls looked at him with awe, while Brue moaned. When the sun came up, they could see the northern end of the forest, south of which the Jackson beast had been feeding. Past it, surprisingly visible from this altitude, were the two beasts, head to head, with eye-stalks touching. The forest ran up close to the steep side of the volcano, leaving only a narrow pass. Beyond that was the river which, turning south, passed the two beasts. Farther up the river, according to legend, was Iron Mountain. They stayed long enough to see what kind of animals prowled the country and to lay out a course, then climbed down and got started. They walked all day, with only a few halts and some minor adventures with strange animals, then found another high place to spend the night. In the darkness they spotted a single fire west of them. The next morning they detoured around that spot and entered the narrow pass. Before noon they stood looking down at the river. The canyon was deeper and wider than Alia could have imagined, and there was more water at the bottom. The country ahead, though, was so rough that it seemed the easiest way was to climb down and go along the river. It took them half the afternoon to get down. Not very long after that, Alia put out his hand. "Wait, I hear voices." They were men's voices, and seemed to be coming downstream. He pushed the other three to a hiding place behind some rocks and bushes. When the owners of the voices came into sight around a turn, he gasped. They weren't walking, but riding on the water itself, in something like a big dish. "Magicians!" Brew whispered. 2 of the men, there were 7, were stroking the water with some kind of wands flattened at the ends. They acted as if they were fleeing from something, talking in low voices and staring back upstream. Just before they came opposite, it caught up with them. The first thing Alia heard was a loud voice, distorted and with an odd accent. He had trouble making out the repeated words. "Halt or I'll shoot. Advance and be recognized. Halt or I'll shoot. Advance." The thing came into sight. Flying. He gripped Brew's shoulder. "The iron flay!" It was made of the kind of iron that didn't rust, and had only 8 legs, not 10. All of them were folded to its sides, except one with a larger oblong foot, one that was extended toward the fugitives. When they saw it, they jumped out of their dish and sank into the water. "Halt or I'll shoot," said the iron flay again, then hurled its spell. The dish shattered abruptly into small bits, and a hissing cloud burst out of the water. The terrible creature circled over the floating fragments for a few minutes, then flew off upstream. When it was gone, the 7 magicians appeared, climbing out of the river on the far side. "Damn it," said one. "A good boot lost, and not a bit of iron. I told you we ought to wait for night." "It doesn't make any difference," said another gloomily. "It's always on watch. Nobody's gotten away with any iron for 3 or 4 seasons." "Well," said Alia, after the magicians had straggled off down the river, "now we've seen it. It certainly put a powerful spell on that floating dish, but it didn't hurt the magicians. Maybe if we're careful, it won't bother us." They followed the twisting canyon and eventually began to hear a roaring noise ahead. It turned out to be the water falling over a cliff, and to go any farther they had to climb out of the canyon again. When they were on top, they could see, ahead of them, what was undoubtedly Iron Mountain. Parts of it were broken or rusted, but most of it was the non-rusting kind. Its shape was a surprise. It didn't look like a mountain, but something made by giants, broken off and stuck into the ground. It was wonderful to stand here, beholding the mightiest magic in the entire world. Still, Alia wasn't satisfied. He felt he must go closer, even, possibly, touch it. "You'd better stay here, Brew. If anything happens to me, take the girls and run. You can get back to the beasts by going down the river." Brew was dismayed. "Don't go any closer. You saw what happened to the magician's dish." "They were trying to steal iron." He unloaded the metal he was carrying, smiled at them, and went on. He'd only covered 100 man-lengths or so when he heard the distorted voice coming from over his head. He looked up, then stood rooted as the iron flay came spiraling down toward him. He tried to think the purest, most serene thoughts he could, though the fervent wish to be somewhere else kept intruding. The thing paused a few lengths away. "Advance and be recognized," it said. He took a faltering hop forward. "Halt or I'll shoot," it said, and he stopped. "Advance." He did. "Halt." He did. Finally he was very close to it, and he waited for a spell to hit him. "Name, rank, and serial number," it demanded. Then, as he was silent, "Speak or I'll shoot." I'm Alia Smith. I don't think I'm rank, and I don't know what a serial number is." "Friend or foe?" Friend? I haven't stolen anything. Just some girls." The thing made a buzzing sound. "You speak, and you have the requisite number of limbs and 1 head. Are you human?"
Yes, I'm human.
Name?
Alia Smith.
Smith? Smith? It buzzed some more. There was a Colonel John Smith on the roster. Are you his descendant?
Yes,
Alia hazarded. Mr. Smith, sir. Robo-Jeep 2749 reporting. All other jeeps inactivated, sir. No ship's personnel or other passengers accounted for in the last 374 planetary cycles. Damage to ship unrepairable without human direction. Sporadic raids by savages, possibly degenerate humans, repelled successfully. Will you assume manual control, sir? Alia stuck with, Yes. Very well, sir. The iron flay descended and walked toward him on 6 of its legs, then squatted. He stared at its back. Actually, it didn't have one. It was hollowed out from the top, and in the hollow were seats. 4 of them. Unable to mistake the meaning, he climbed in and sat down. Nothing happened for a while. Then the creature began to buzz again. Have you forgotten the controls, sir? The lever on the left is for elevation, the other one for horizontal motion. Would you prefer vocal control?
No, this is all right.
Very good, sir. The buzz stopped. The levers were just in front of him. Gingerly, he reached out and gave the left-hand one a twitch, then yelled and let go of it as they shot upward. They stopped, and he tried again gently. They rose more smoothly. He experimented with the other and moved forward, backward, and to the sides. He lowered to a height where he was less frightened. Flay? You spoke, sir.
I can go wherever I want?
Except into obvious danger, sir. I'm programmed to avoid that. Alia flew toward where he'd left his companions. They lay face down, lamenting, Janey loudest of all. He eyed her posterior and bruise with some misgivings. The flay's seats were a little skimpy. He landed beside them, cleared his throat, and waited until they raised dumbfounded faces. Get in, he said. Against feeble protests from the others, he maneuvered the creature, which preferred to be called Jeep, toward Iron Mountain. When they were close, Jeep woke up, buzzed, and hovered while a great doorway slid open. It carried the 4, clinging together, into the hollow blackness within. Then, quite suddenly, even though the door slid shut behind them, it was light as day inside. What a cave! Cylindrical, all of 50 man-lengths across, it slanted down until it must reach far below the ground. Far down there, where Jeep was taking them, were some level platforms. As soon as they settled on one, a terrible, huge, clanking monster, also of non-rusting iron, flew toward them. They huddled while it spoke. Mr. Smith, sir. Robo-Repair Unit 17 reporting. Ship's power and drive in order. Unable to complete hull repairs or repair other working and scouting units without cannibalizing part of living quarters. Do I have Mr. Smith's permission to proceed? Alia gulped several times and got out. Yes? Thank you, sir. The job will require arc cutting and welding and other high-temperature processes. Will you be here very long? We hope not. Very well, sir. I'll begin as soon as you leave. They sat for a while, wondering what to do. Finally Alia said, Jeep, sir, would we be permitted to leave? At once, sir. More buzzing, and the door opened again. As they flew away, Jeep said, Sir, Robo-Repair wants to know whether to repair ship in its present position or move it elsewhere. Alia was beginning to feel more confident. In its present position, I think, for now. As they turned south, Janey began to sniffle. What now? He demanded. I miss my demon. Alia turned to Brew. Isn't that just like a woman? She wants a demon again. She raised her head and glared at him.
He was cute and soft, and he cuddled against me and made happy sounds. You tamed the iron flay, and if you really loved me, you could surely handle one little fluffy demon." Alia let Jeep stop and hang there while he tried to cope with the effrontery of it. After all he'd been through, stealing her, to have her suggest that he go into more danger just to satisfy her crazy whim. His hands reached out for the levers again. Shaking his head dazedly, he started northeast to look for the outlaws. Some time later, they were headed south again, Janie's demon asleep in her lap. Jeep was loggy with iron and other treasures extorted from various bands of outlaws. In the 2 rear seats, Brew and Mary Sue were holding hands. He was startled to see 2 more beasts hunching up from the south beyond the Smiths and Jacksons, 4 of them together at one time. When they circled down, they found Parboss Smith on his hare, scowling southward. He cringed when he saw the iron flay, then managed to look both dumbfounded and furious when he recognized Alia and Brew. "You young hoodlums! I'm glad that thing caught you. Look there! Those are the Grands and the Kendys coming, and Parboss Jackson so mad he'll join them against us." His face softened into the start of a grin as he sized up the 2 girls, but then hardened again. "I hope you're proud of yourselves, getting a whole clan killed or made slaves." Alia started toward a clearing. "Come on down, Parboss. We've got so much magic now, we could laugh at all the clans in the world." And to Jeep, "Jeep, can we bring Iron Mountain over here and fly it around and show these savages they better behave?" "A bloodless demonstration?" "Certainly, sir. I'll go aloft at once and radio." The 4 stood in the clearing, with awed Smiths around them at a respectful distance. Parboss came pushing through the hare, as awed as any, but less scared. "Tamed the iron flay," he began to guffaw. "Stole Parboss Jackson's own 2 daughters. Ha ha! Young man, when I retire—" His eyes covered Janie approvingly, then turned back to Alia. "You're wounded. What? Oh, tooth marks." He laughed some more. "Didn't I say any girl worth stealing would put up a fight?" Alia happened to be looking toward Brew, who had his own knot of admirers. Mary Sue was standing a little behind him, as a bride should. At Parboss's words she frowned, and her eyes fixed on Brew's smooth shoulder. Her gaze grew more intent. She moved slowly forward, her eyes crossing as they remained on the spot. Closer, closer. Brew yelled.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Manners of the Age by H.B. Fyfe. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, March 1952. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The red tennis robot scooted desperately across the court, its 4 wide-set wheels squealing. For a moment, Robert's hard-hit passing shot seemed to have scored. Then, at the last instant, the robot whipped around its single racket-equipped arm. Robert sprawled headlong in a futile lunge at the return. "Game and set to red 3, announced the referee boxed from its high station above the net. "Ah, shut up," growled Robert, and flung down his racket for one of the white serving robots to retrieve. "Yes, Robert," agreed the voice. "Will Robert continue to play?" Interpreting the man's savage mumble as a negative, it told its opponent, "Return to your stall, Red 3. Robert strode off wordlessly toward the house. Reaching the 100-foot square swimming pool, he hesitated uncertainly. "Weather's so damned hot," he muttered. "Why didn't the old-time scientists find out how to do something about that while there were still enough people on Earth to manage it?" He stripped off his damp clothing and dropped it on the beach of white sand. Behind him sounded the steps of a humanoid serving robot, hastening to pick it up. Robert plunged deep into the cooling water and let himself float lazily to the surface. Maybe they did, he thought. I could send a robot over to the old city library for information. Still, actually doing anything would probably take the resources of a good many persons, and it isn't so easy to find people now that Earth is practically deserted. He rolled sideward for a breath and began to swim slowly for the opposite side of the pool, reflecting upon the curious culture of the planet. Although he had accepted this all his life, it really was remarkable how the original home of the human race had been forsaken for fresher worlds among the stars. Or was it more remarkable that a few individuals had asserted their independence by remaining? Robert was aware that the decision involved few difficulties, considering the wealth of robots and other automatic machines. He regretted knowing so few humans, though they were really not necessary. If not for his hobby of televising, he would probably not know any at all. Wonder how far past the old city I'd have to go to meet someone in person, he murmured as he pulled himself from the pool. Maybe I ought to try accepting that televised invitation of the other night. Several dark, user-form robots were smoothing the sand on the beach under the direction of a blue humanoid supervisor. Watching them idly, Robert estimated that it must be 10 years since he had seen another human face to face. His parents were dim memories. He got along very well, however, with robots to serve him or to obtain occasional information from the automatic scanners of the city library that had long ago been equipped to serve such a purpose. Much better than things were in the old days, he told himself as he crossed the lawn to his sprawling white mansion. Must have been awful before the population declined. Imagine having people all around you, having to listen to them, see them, and argue to make them do what you wanted. The heel of his bare right foot came down heavily on a pebble, and he swore without awareness of the precise meaning of the ancient phrases. He limped into the baths and beckoned a waiting robot as he stretched out on a rubbing table. "Call Blue 1, he ordered. The red robot pushed a button on the wall before beginning the massage. In a few moments, the majordomo arrived. "Did Robert enjoy the tennis?" it inquired politely. "I did not," snapped the man. "Red 3 won, and by too big a score. Have it geared down a few feet per second." "Yes, Robert. And have the lawn screened again for pebbles." As Blue 1 retired, he relaxed, and turned his mind to ideas for filling the evening. He hoped Henry would televise. Robert had news for him. After a short nap and dinner, he took the elevator to his 3-story tower and turned on the television robot. Seating himself in a comfortable armchair, he directed the machine from one channel to another. For some time, there was no answer to his perfunctory call signals, but one of his few acquaintances finally came on. "Jack here," said a quiet voice that Robert had long suspected of being disguised by a filter microphone. "I haven't heard you for some weeks," he remarked, eyeing the swirling colours on the screen. He disliked Jack for never showing his face, but curiosity as to what lay behind the mechanical image projected by the other's transmitter preserved the acquaintance. "I was busy," said the bodiless voice, with a discreet hint of a chuckle that Robert found chilling. He wondered what Jack had been up to. He remembered once being favoured with a televised view of Jack's favourite sport, a battle between companies of robots designed for the purpose, horribly reminiscent of human conflicts Robert had seen on historical films. He soon made an excuse to break off and set the robot to scanning Henry's channel. He had something to tell the older man, who lived only about 100 miles away and was as close to being his friend as was possible in this age of scattered, self-sufficient dwellings. "I don't mind talking to him," Robert reflected. "At least he doesn't overdo this business of individual privacy." He thought briefly of the disdainful face, seemingly on a distant station, which had merely examined him for several minutes one night without ever condescending to speak. Recalling his rage at this treatment, Robert wondered how the ancients had managed to get along together when there were so many of them. They must have had some strict code of behaviour, he supposed, or they never would have bred so enormous a population. "I must find out about that some day," he decided. "How did you act, for instance, if you wanted to play tennis, but someone else just refused and went to eat dinner? Maybe that was why the ancients had so many murders." He noticed that the robot was getting an answer from Henry's station and was pleased. He could talk as long as he liked, knowing Henry would not resent his cutting off any time he became bored with the conversation. The robot focused the image smoothly. Henry gave the impression of being a small man. He was grey and wrinkled compared with Robert, but his black eyes were alertly sharp. He smiled his greeting and immediately launched into a story of one of his youthful trips through the mountains, from the point at which it had been interrupted the last time they had talked. Robert listened impatiently. "Maybe I have some interesting news," he remarked as the other finished. "I picked up a new station the other night." "That reminds me of a time when I was a boy and—" Robert fidgeted while Henry described watching his father build a spare television set as a hobby, with only a minimum of robot help. He pounced upon the first pause. "A new station," he repeated. "Came in very well, too. I can't imagine why I never picked it up before." "Distant, perhaps?" asked Henry resignedly. "No, not very far from me, as a matter of fact." "You can't always tell, especially with the ocean so close. Now that there are so few people, you'd think there'd be land enough for all of them, but a good many spend all their lives aboard ship robots." "Not this one," said Robert. "She even showed me an outside view of her home." Henry's eyebrows rose. "She? A woman?" "Her name is Marcia Joan." "Well, well," said Henry. "Imagine that. Women, as I recall, usually do have funny names." He gazed thoughtfully at his well-kept hands. "Did I ever tell you about the last woman I knew?" he asked. "About 20 years ago. We had a son, you know, but he grew up and wanted his own home and robots." "Natural enough," Robert commented, somewhat briefly, since Henry had told him the story before. "I often wonder what became of him," mused the older man. "That's a trouble with what's left of Earth culture. No families anymore." "Now he'll tell about the time he lived in a crowd of 5, thought Robert. He, his wife, their boy, and the visiting couple with a fleet of robot helicopters. Deciding that Henry could reminisce just as well without a listener, Robert quietly ordered the robot to turn itself off. "Maybe I will make the trip," he pondered on the way downstairs. if only to see what it's like with another person about. At about noon of the second day after that, he remembered that thought with regret. The ancient roads, seldom used and never repaired, were rough and bumpy. Having no flying robots, Robert was compelled to transport himself and a few mechanical servants in ground vehicles. He had, idiotically, he now realized, started with the dawn and was already tired. Consequently, he was perhaps unduly annoyed when two tiny spy eyes flew down from the hills to hover above his caravan on whirring little propellers. He tried to glance up pleasantly while their lenses televised pictures to their base, but he feared that his smile was strained. The spy eyes retired after a few minutes. Robert's vehicle, at his voiced order, turned onto a road leading between two forested hills. Right there, he thought 4 hours later, was where I made my mistake. I should have turned back and gone home. He stood in the doorway of a small cottage of pale blue trimmed with yellow, watching his robots unload baggage. They were supervised by Blue 2, the spare for Blue 1. Also watching, as silently as Robert, was a pink and blue striped robot which had guided the caravan from the entrance gate to the cottage. After one confused protest in a curiously high voice, it had not spoken. "Maybe we shouldn't have driven through that flower bed," thought Robert. "Still, the thing ought to be versatile enough to say so. I wouldn't have such a gimcrack contraption." He looked up as another humanoid robot in similar colours approached along the line of shrubs separating the main lawns from that surrounding the cottage. "Marcia Joan has finished her nap. You may come to the house now." Robert's jaw hung slack as he sought for a reply. His face flushed at the idea of a robot's offering him permission to enter the house. Nevertheless, he followed it across the wide lawn and between banks of gaily blossoming flowers to the main house. Robert was not sure which colour scheme he disliked more, that of the robot or the unemphatic pastel tints of the house. The robot led the way inside and along a hall. It pulled back a curtain near the other end, revealing a room with furniture for human use. Robert stared at the girl who sat in an armchair, clad in a long robe of soft pink material. She looked a few years younger than he. Her hair and eyes were also brown, though darker. In contrast to Robert's, her smooth skin was only lightly tanned, and she wore her hair much longer. He thought her oval face might have been pleasant, if not for the analytical expression she wore. "I am quite human," he said in annoyance. "Do you have a voice?" She rose and walked over to him curiously. Robert saw that she was several inches shorter than he, about the height of one of his robots. He condescended to bear her scrutiny. "You look just as you do on the telescreen," she marvelled. Robert began to wonder if the girl were feeble-minded. How else should he look? "I usually swim at this hour," he said to change the subject. "Where is the pool?" Marcia Joan stared at him. "Pool of what?" she asked. Sensing sarcasm, he scowled. "Pool of water, of course, to swim in. What did you think I meant? A pool of oil?" "I am not acquainted with your habits," retorted the girl. "None of that stupid wit," he snapped. "Where is the pool?" "Don't shout!" shouted the girl. Her voice was high and unpleasantly shrill compared with his. "I don't have a pool. Who wants a swimming pool anyway?" Robert felt his face flushing with rage. "So she won't tell me," he thought. "All right, I'll find it myself. Everybody has a pool, and if she comes in, I'll hold her head under for a while." Sneering, he turned toward the nearest exit from the house. The gaily striped robot hastened after him. The door failed to swing back as it should have at Robert's approach. Impatiently, he seized the ornamental handle. He felt his shoulder grasped by a metal hand. "Do not use the front door," said the robot. "Let go," ordered Robert, incensed that any robot should presume to hinder him. "Only Marcia Joan uses this door," said the robot, ignoring Robert's displeasure. "I'll use it if I like," declared Robert, jerking the handle. The next moment he was lifted bodily into the air. By the time he realized what was happening, he was carried, face down, along the hall. Too astonished even to yell, he caught a glimpse of Marcia Joan's tiny feet beneath the hem of her pink robe as his head passed the curtained doorway. The robot clumped onto the door at the rear of the house and out into the sunshine. There it released its grip. When Robert regained the breath knocked out of him by the drop and assured himself that no bones were broken, his anger returned. "I'll find it, wherever it is," he growled, and set out to search the grounds. About 20 minutes later, he was forced to admit that there really was no swimming pool. Except for a brook 50 yards away, there was only the tiled bathroom of the cottage to bathe in. "Primitive!" exclaimed Robert, eyeing this. "Manually operated water supply, too. I must have the robots fix something better for tomorrow." Since none of his robots was equipped with a thermometer, he had to draw the bath himself. Meanwhile, he gave orders to Blue 2 regarding the brook and a place to swim. He managed to fill the tub without scalding himself, mainly because there was no hot water. His irritation, by the time he had dressed in fresh clothes and prepared for another talk with his hostess, was still lively. "Ah, you return," Marcia Joan commented from a window above the back door. "It's time to eat," said Robert frankly. "You are mistaken." He glanced at the sunset, which was already fading. "It is time," he insisted. "I always eat at this hour." "Well, I don't." Robert leaned back to examine her expression more carefully. He felt very much the way he had the day the water supply robot for his pool had broken down and, despite Robert's bellowed orders, had flooded a good part of the lawn before Blue One had disconnected it. Some instinct warned him, moreover, that bellowing now would be as useless as it had been then. "What do you do now?" he asked. "I dress for the evening." "And when do you eat?" "After I finish dressing." "I'll wait for you," said Robert, feeling that much tolerance could do no particular harm. He encountered the pink and blue robot in the hall, superintending several plain yellow ones bearing dishes in covered platters. Robert followed them to a dining room. "Marcia Joan sits there," the majordomo informed him as he moved toward the only chair at the table. Robert warily retreated to the opposite side of the table and looked for another chair. None was visible. Of course, he thought, trying to be fair. Why should anybody in this day have more than one chair? Robots don't sit. He waited for the majordomo to leave, but it did not. The serving robots finished laying out the dishes and retired to posts along the wall. Finally, Robert decided that he would have to make his status clear or risk going hungry. "If I sit down somewhere," he decided, "it may recognize me as human. What a stupid machine to have." He started around the end of the table again, but the striped robot moved to intercept him. Robert stopped. Oh well, he sighed, sitting sidewise on a corner of the table. The robot hesitated, made one or two false starts in different directions, then halted. This situation had apparently not been included among its memory tapes. Robert grinned and lifted the cover of the nearest platter. He managed to eat, despite his ungraceful position and what he considered the scarcity of the food. Just as he finished the last dish, he heard footsteps in the hall. Marcia Joan had dressed in a fresh robe of crimson. Its thinner material was gathered at the waist by clasps of gleaming gold. The arrangement emphasized bodily contours Robert had previously seen only in historical films. He became aware that she was regarding him with much the same suggestion of helpless dismay as the majordomo. "Why, you've eaten it all!" she exclaimed. "All?" snorted Robert. "There was hardly any food." Marcia Joan walked slowly around the table, staring at the empty dishes. "A few bits of raw vegetables and the tiniest portion of protein concentrate I ever saw," Robert continued. "Do you call that a dinner to serve a guest?" "And I especially ordered 2 portions." "2?" Robert repeated in astonishment. "You must visit me sometime. I'll show you." "What's the matter with my food?" interrupted the girl. "I follow the best diet advice my robots could find in the city library." "They should have looked for human diets, not songbirds." He lifted a cover in hopes of finding some overlooked morsel, but the platter was bare. "No wonder you act so strangely," he said. "You must be suffering from malnutrition. I don't wonder with a skimpy diet like this." "It's very healthful," insisted Marcia Joan. "The old film said it was good for the figure, too." "Not interested," grunted Robert. "I'm satisfied as I am." "Oh, yes? You look gawky to me." "You don't," retorted Robert, examining her disdainfully. "You are short and stubby and too plump." "Plump?" "Worse, you're actually fat in lots of places I'm not." "At least not between the ears." Robert blinked. What? "And besides," she stormed on, "those robots you brought are painted the most repulsive colors." Robert closed his mouth and silently sought the connection. "Robots?" he thought. "Not fat, but repulsive colors," she said. "What has that to do with food?" The woman seems incapable of logic. "And furthermore," Marcia Joan was saying, "I'm not sure I care for the looks of you. Lulu, put him out." "Who's Lulu?" demanded Robert. Then, as the majordomo moved forward, he understood. "What a silly name for a robot!" he exclaimed. "I suppose you'd call it Robert. Will you go now, or shall I call more robots?" "I am not a fool," said Robert haughtily. "I shall go. Thank you for the disgusting dinner." "Do not use the front door," said the robot. "Only Marcia Joan uses that. All robots use other doors." Robert growled, but walked down the hall to the back door. As this swung open to permit his passage, he halted. "It's dark out there now," he complained over his shoulder. "Don't you have any lights on your grounds? Do you want me to trip over something?" "Of course I have ground lights," shrilled Marcia Joan. "I'll show you. Not that I care if you trip or not." A moment later, lights concealed among the trees glowed into life. Robert walked outside and turned toward the cottage. "I should have asked her what the colors of my robots had to do with it," he thought, and turned back to re-enter. He walked right into the closed door, which failed to open before him, though it had operated smoothly a moment ago. "Robots not admitted after dark," a mechanical voice informed him, Return to your stall in the shed." "Whom do you think you're talking to?" demanded Robert. "I'm not one of your robots." There was a pause. "Is it Marcia Joan?" asked the voice box, after considerable buzzing and whirring. "No, I'm Robert." There was another pause, while the mechanism laboriously shifted back to its other speech tape. Then, "Robots not admitted after dark. Return to your stall in the shed." Robert slowly raised both hands to his temples. Lingeringly, he dragged them down over his cheeks and under his chin until at last the fingers interlaced over his tight lips. After a moment, he let out his breath between his fingers and dropped his hands to his sides. He raised one foot to kick, but decided that the door looked too hard. He walked away between the beds of flowers, grumbling. Reaching the vicinity of the cottage, he parted the tall shrubs bordering its grounds and looked through carefully before proceeding. Pleased at the gleam of water, he called Blue too. "Good enough. Put the other robots away for the night. They can trim the edges tomorrow." He started into the cottage, but his majordomo warned, "Someone comes." Robert looked around. Through thin portions of the shrubbery, he caught a glimpse of Marcia Joan's crimson robe, nearly black in the diffused glow of the lights illuminating the grounds. "Robert!" called the girl angrily. "What are your robots doing? I saw them from my upstairs window." "Wait there!" exclaimed Robert as she reached the shrubs. "What? Are you trying to tell me where I can go or not go? Yee!" The shriek was followed by a tremendous splash. Robert stepped forward in time to be spattered by a part of the flying spray. It was cold. Naturally, being drawn from the brook, he reflected, "Oh well, the sun will warm it tomorrow." There was a frenzy of thrashing and splashing in the dimly lighted water at his feet, accompanied by coughs and spluttering demands that he do something. Robert reached down with one hand, caught his hostess by the wrist, and heaved her up to solid ground. "My robots are digging you a little swimming hole," he told her. "They brought the water from the brook by a trench. You can finish it with concrete or plastics later. It's only 15 by 30 feet. He expected some sort of acknowledgment of his efforts, and peered at her through the gloom when none was forthcoming. He thus caught a glimpse of the full swinging slap aimed at his face. He tried to duck. There was another splash, followed by more floundering about. "Reach up," said Robert patiently, "and I'll pull you out again. I didn't expect you to like it this much." Marcia Joan scrambled up the bank, tugged viciously at her sodden robe, and headed for the nearest pathway without replying. Robert followed along. As they passed under one of the lights, he noticed that the red reflections of the wet material, where it clung snugly to the girl's body, were almost the color of some of his robots. The tennis robot, he thought, and the moving targets for archery. In fact, all the sporting equipment. "You talk about food for the figure," he remarked lightly. "You should see yourself now. It's really funny the way—" He stopped. Some strange emotion stifled his impulse to laugh at the way the robe clung. Instead, he lengthened his stride, but he was still a few feet behind when she charged through the front entrance of the house. The door, having opened automatically for her, started to swing closed. Robert sprang forward to catch it. "Wait a minute!" he cried. Marcia Joan snapped something that sounded like "Get out!" over her shoulder, and squished off toward the stairs. As Robert started through the door to follow, the striped robot hastened toward him from its post in the hall. "Do not use the front door," it warned him. "Out of my way," growled Robert. The robot reached out to enforce the command. Robert seized it by the forearm and put all his weight into a sudden tug. The machine tottered off balance. Releasing his grip, he sent it staggering out the door with a quick shove. A hasty glance showed Marcia Joan flapping wetly up the last steps. Robert turned to face the robot. "Do not use that door," he quoted vindictively, and the robot halted its rush indecisively. "Only Marcia Joan uses it." The majordomo hesitated. After a moment, it strode off around the corner of the house. First, darting one more look at the stairs, Robert thrust his head outside and shouted, "Blue 2!" He held the door open while he waited. There was an answer from the shrubbery. Presently, his own supervisor hurried up. "Fetch the emergency toolbox," Robert ordered, "and bring a couple of others with you." "Naturally, Robert, I would not carry it myself." A moment after the robot had departed on the errand, heavy steps sounded at the rear of the hall. Marcia Joan's robot had dealt with the mechanism of the back door. Robert eyed the metal mask as the robot walked up to him. He found the color contrast less pleasant than ever. "I am not using the door," he said hastily. "I am merely holding it open." "Do you intend to use it?" "I haven't decided." "I shall carry you out back," the robot decided for him. "No, you don't!" exclaimed Robert, leaping backward. The door immediately began to swing shut as he passed through. Cursing, he lunged forward. The robot reached for him. This time, Robert missed his grip. Before he could duck away, his wrist was trapped in a metal grasp. "The door will close," he despaired. "They'll be too late." Then suddenly he felt the portal drawn back and heard Blue 2 speak. "What does Robert wish?" "Throw this heap out the door," gasped Robert. Amid a trampling of many feet, the majordomo was raised bodily by Blue 2 and another pair of robots' machines and hustled outside. Since the grip on Robert's wrist was not relaxed, he involuntarily accompanied the rush of metal bodies. "Catch the door," he called to Blue 2. When the latter sprang to obey, the other two took the action as a signal to drop their burden. The pink and blue robot landed full length with a jingling crash. Robert was free. With the robots he made for the entrance. Hearing footsteps behind him as the majordomo regained its feet, he slipped hastily inside. "Pick up that toolbox," he snapped. "When that robot stops in the doorway, knock its head off." Turning, he held up a finger. "Do not use the front door." The majordomo hesitated. The heavy toolbox in the grip of Blue 2 descended with a thud. The pink and blue robot landed on the ground a yard or two outside the door, as if dropped from the second floor. It bounced once, emitted a few sparks and pungent wisps of smoke, lay still. "Never mind, that's good enough," said Robert as Blue 2 stepped forward. "One of the others can drag it off to the repair shop. Have the toolbox brought with us." "What does Robert wish now?" inquired Blue 2, trailing the man toward the stairway. "I am going upstairs," said Robert, "and I intend to be prepared if any more doors are closed against me." He started up, the measured treads of his own robots sounding reassuringly behind him. It was about a week later that Robert sat relaxed in the armchair before his own telescreen, facing Henry's wizened visage. The elder man clucked sympathetically as he re-examined the scratches on Robert's face and the bruise under his right eye. "And so you left there in the morning?" "I certainly did," declared Robert. "We registered a marriage record at the city library by television, of course, but I don't care if I never see her again. She needn't even tell me about the child, if any. I simply can't stand that girl." "Now," Henry said. "I mean it. Absolutely no consideration for my wishes. Everything in the house was run to suit her convenience." "After all," Henry pointed out, "it is her house." Robert glared. "What has that to do with it? I don't think I was as unreasonable as she said in smashing that robot. The thing just wouldn't let me alone." "I guess," Henry suggested, "it was conditioned to obey Marcia Joan, not you." "Well, that shows you. Whose orders are to count, anyway? When I tell a robot to do something, I expect it done. How would you like to find robots trying to boss you around?" "Are you talking about robots?" asked Henry. "Or the girl?" "Same thing, isn't it? Or it would be if I decided to bring her home with me." "Conflict of desires," murmured Henry. "Exactly. It's maddening to have a perfectly logical action interfered with because there's another person present to insist, mind you, on having her way." "And for 20-odd years you've had your own way in every tiny thing." Somewhere in the back of Robert's mind lurked a feeling that Henry sounded slightly sarcastic. "Well, why shouldn't I?" he demanded. "I noticed that in every disagreement my view was the right one." "It was?" "Of course it was. What did you mean by that tone?" "Nothing." Henry seemed lost in thought. "I was just wondering how many right views are left on this planet. There must be quite a few, all different, even if we have picked up only a few by television. An interesting facet of our peculiar culture. Every individual omnipotent and omniscient, within his own sphere." Robert regarded him with indignant incredulity. "You don't seem to understand my point," he began again. "I told her we ought to come to my house, where things are better arranged, and she simply refused. Contradicted me. It was most—" He broke off. "The impudence of him!" he exclaimed. "Signing off when I wanted to talk."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI free. And free of charge, of course.